And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. It's fantastic to have so many of you in the chat tonight there in the Ideas Room. And of course, as usual, I'm joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
It's great to see you. And Olivia, it's been kind of crazy out there lately.
Yes, but we're starting to get used to it.
That's true.
You know, it's the shock and awe is over. This has become the new normal, right?
It's true. It's adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're looking at. Speaking of adjustment, though, we'll never get used to President Biden, unfortunately. He held a very strange press conference with a lot of notes, and many veteran reporters who were there said they don't even remember Reagan or other people who were older in office ever having this kind of difficulty. And we're going to explore that tonight because it's more of the bizarro world that we're seeing. And of course, I want to remind everyone that we're going to be taking your questions tonight in the second half of the program. So get them ready. You can ask them in caps, and Miss Olivia is going to put those together as she always does.
I already have.
Tonight is the Special X State of the Union. And of course, speaking of Biden, he hasn't given a State of the Union yet, which is very unusual. You have to understand when a president gets in office, they can't wait to get in there and give the State of the Union. It's like claiming the crown. But in this case, they know that Biden cannot stand up there for an hour or two and just give a speech because he wanders around and his thought process wanders a lot. And this is the nature of the thing. But the media let this cognitively impaired individual get into office because they were just on a crazy drive over the cliff psychosis to have, the deep state pleased and Trump out of there. So what we have is Biden in there, and it's, it doesn't serve us any good, really, even to call out Biden on this level because it's, the kind of cognitive decline that he's in means he's someone's puppet, and he was never a great thinker to start with. So it's actually very disturbing, and that's part of the X State of the Union that we're going to go into because we are in a very strange state here in America and around the world. And we need to explore some of the things that are contributing to this and also ways to awaken enough of the population to get out of it. And even with the, with this broadcast tonight, we have the ability to bring these things to the fore. And we've seen so many great heroes doing exactly that. So we're lucky in that regard. Now, some of the things we're going to get into are the things that the Biden administration has been stressing. And again, I think we have to think of President Biden as like the old Soviet leaders, where the Politburo would just push this old leader out there and, he'd give their kind of clunky rendition and then he'd go hide and they'd have a phony state press. Well, we're very close to all that now on one hand. And with all of the, kind of lockdown draconian stuff and this kind of the nature of the situation that we find ourselves in, that's kind of more like the Nazi Party, the arising of real Nazi rules, And I would say that a lot of the coverage that we're seeing on the mainstream side kind of has the flavor of, the Nazis have taken over and you have little discussions about, those concentration camps should be in the South side of the country. No, the concentration camps should be over there on the North. And this kind of thing, it's like the debates in the media are nothing. And they have all this artificial stuff in relation to the injection and all that. So, when we see this going on, what they're trying to do is say, well, more people should get the injection. It should be fair. And they're building all these issues that we would normally think about in terms of something that was important. But with what they're doing, there's no debate in there about the efficacy or the constitutionality or the medical ethics behind the thing that they're doing. So we're going to get into that tonight as well. Obviously, many channels have experienced extreme censorship, even touching on this in any capacity. And one of those people who has really, been a regular on this program and is very close with all the work that we do is Catherine Austin Fitts, who is the former Assistant Housing Secretary and the president of Solari. It's done so much investment all of her life, but she's been through this process. And what happened was back there, I would say in December, when she gave an interview for a documentary called Planet Lockdown, where she just outlined things. It was actually kind of basic for Fitz in a sense. It was sort of basic exercise stuff for her. And but what happened was the institutions of the media flipped out. And so I did some interviews recently with Catherine Austin Fitz. She came back on the program, and I put those interviews in our newsletter, but I didn't run them on our YouTube channel because, quite frankly, I could see that it was another opportunity for these forces to censor her. I wasn't so much concerned about us or what we do with the channel or whatever it is, but I didn't want to see that dynamic in play again, especially after they had been celebrating in the media their ability to shut her out. And I want to show this to you and also remind everyone who hasn't seen those two very crucial interviews. All you have to do is sign up at darkjournalist.com for our newsletter, which is free. And when we resend the newsletter out that we sent today, they'll both be in there, and that'll come back out on Tuesday. So that's very easy stuff to get at, and just make sure that you're there at darkjournalist.com. It's a good idea anyway, because at any time, as we know with these social media networks, it's very easy for them to just throw anybody off.
It's too easy.
We've seen it left and right. All right, so this was, and this again is the mainstream media going after Fitz. Now, this is the Washington Post. Facebook and YouTube banned Planet Lockdown, film filled with coronavirus falsehoods after it was shared by millions. All right, Washington Post. And they did a big hit job in there on RFK Jr., and they just sort of threw Fitz along for the ride, except that they were celebrating the fact that on TikTok they had banned the hashtag Catherine Austin Fitz. Now, I've never seen, maybe somebody out there can enlighten me on this, but in all my dealings with Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, I've never seen them ban a person's name. Have you ever heard of that? I think this is exceptional and represents a new level of censorship. They just unpersoned Catherine Austin Fitz. Now, they've banned Trump off things, but they didn't ban you from saying the name Trump. So this is like Akhenaten territory.
Right, exactly.
I thought this was alarming. Here's another one. This is Forbes, Planet Lockdown film spreading unfounded claims about COVID-19, coronavirus, etc. And this guy, Bruce Y. Lee, he does a lot of things for Forbes, and you'd think that he would have a level head and look at this like a journalist would. This is one of the freakiest articles I've ever read in my life, literally. And, he's saying, I'm a writer, journalist, professor, systems modeler. I'm sure they just put him up to it, or he actually thinks that this stuff is true, and he's just unenlightened about these things, which is very possible. And these people live, I can tell you from having been exposed to those types of journalistic environments, they live in an environment where you're working on a story and someone comes up to you and gives you kind of the Vulcan nerve pinch on the shoulder at a certain point. It says, no, you can't go there. So I have my fair share of empathy with these people. But, in that case, just get out of the job because you look ridiculous reporting stuff like this. Okay. I'm going to read just a little bit of what he wrote, however, in Forbes. Now, remember, this is Forbes trying to get the message out that it's good. Censorship is good. The name of the video is Planet Lockdown, not Planet Conspiracy Theory or Planet Hollywood. This guy thinks he's funny, too. He's got a line a minute. However, the COVID-19 pandemic storylines being advanced by Planet Lockdown seem straight out of Hollywood-esque movie fiction. Nevertheless, despite making a number of baseless claims, actually, it seems like all the claims were well documented. And the other thing is, when was debate ever outlawed in a country that is supposedly democratic? Nevertheless, despite making a number of baseless claims, trailers of this video have been, surprise, surprise, spreading on social media, getting over 20 million views. Boy, are they upset because they can't even get 1 million views for this article, I'm sure. Yet, if you were waiting in anticipation for a sequel to the video Plandemic, just like you were waiting for Deuce Bigalow, European Gigolo, I kid you not, this guy. After watching Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo, you are in luck. I mean, this is the level that this guy is operating on. It's incredibly simple-minded. And the article goes on and on like this, and then we're supposed to take this guy seriously as it goes. The film features an all-star cast of who? Huh? There's Carrie Madej, DO, who has a history of making claims such as the COVID-19 vaccines are designed to make us into genetically modified organisms. Well, you know, what's wrong with researching that? It's probably a pretty good idea. They tried it with GMOs after all. And then they go on and they're like talking about Vice. But a couple of things in here, of course, they saved most of their gunfire again for RFK Jr. And they try and really line him up as the piñata of this whole thing. Another person who appeared in Planet Lockdown was Newt Witkowski, PhD, who apparently used to work at Rockefeller University as a biostatistician. If you haven't heard, Witkowski has been pushing for herd immunity strategies. By the way, Witkowski is an incredibly good, solid researcher. Otherwise potentially known as do nothing about the pandemic and let the virus spread and kill people except those wealthy enough to avoid the virus strategies. So, you know, they're just kind of throwing things in there. And finally, they get to Fitz. They say, and then there's Kasten Austrin Fitz, who has served as Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development for President George H.W. Bush. She's appeared on Alex Jones' InfoWars multiple times. Well, she deserves to be put in isolation for that, I'm sure. And then they say, not only that, but she's written for Robert F. Kennedy's Children's Health Defense. Well, it's a closed case. She's obviously mentally unstable. While the name Children's Health Defense may sound like an organization that makes missile warning systems for children, there's more of this guy. Unbelievable. Incredible. You know, in like a very dark sense of humor, right? A group that basically ties chronic conditions to a number of factors, including vaccines. In the video, Fitz alluded to a committee that runs the world that she called Mr. Global. This is a bit different from the Mr. Vane that the Culture Beat referred to in the 1993 dance song.
What?
This is Forbes magazine. According to Fitz, Mr. Global is utilizing the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic to grab further control of you and others around everyone, possibly by injecting microchips via the COVID-19 vaccines. It sounds pretty reasonable. Those COVID-19 vaccines will modify your DNA, says Fitz, and for all we know, make you infertile, unquote. As well, without really offering any evidence supporting these claims, yep, that's what she said. Oh, and by the way, Fitz claimed that massive voter fraud occurred during the 2020 presidential election. Yeah, well, anyone who pays attention to elections knows indeed that massive voter fraud took place in the 2020 election. So, but I thought it was interesting that here they are celebrating and they said, you know, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube have been attempting to scrub their platforms of the video. And that gives you the thing. They can't, in a regular back and forth on ideas, they can't hold up. These networks cannot hold up. Even if you think one side has the truth of the other, the fact that they won't allow any debate or any conversation means their view of the world, you know, and we've gone over this, even in the 2000s or the 90s, like all these shows were popularized and they would have all kinds of people come in their shows, right? You'd have skinheads who were there, and then you'd have like Black Panthers on the other side, and you get these different extremes and you get conversations going and you get all the controversy and people would work out those ideas. Now it's, you have to go along with whatever Twitter says or else you're gone. You're an unperson. And we've been seeing so much of this. And I think, you know, just decrying the censorship isn't enough. It's something to understand it, however. And it's not something that I think we should dwell upon, but it's something that in a regular society that was democratically based in a republic, it would never happen. So we're obviously moving into this more bizarre territory as we've been reporting on during, you know, the time that we've done this show. But now it seems into quite an overdrive. So what's interesting is the thing that they're placing in the middle of all this, with all the bizarre lockdowns and government takeover stuff, is they're starting to inject their version of the CIA UFO threat narrative. Now, everywhere you go in the media, you're going to hear about UFOs. Suddenly, it's okay to talk about UFOs. And this is a major piece of the State of the Union, because to those of us who are aware, weren't able to talk about it before, except in fiction, things like the X-Files, or in books or whatever, but the media wouldn't take it seriously. That was part of the punchline. The government is tight-lipped, and the media laughs at it. Suddenly, the CIA and the media love this, which gives us the idea that they're getting ready to use it for something. And we're going to get into first of all, what they're going to be using it for, and then second of all, who they're using to put it into position, because their first version with TTSA really flopped in a number of ways, although it was successful in other ways. And we're going to explore how that shakes out. The actual corporation ended up $50 million in debt. They had a TV show which was ranked 49th in its time slot, which is one of the worst rankings you can get.
I didn't know that.
And it was all thanks to that great talent, Lou. TTSA's Lou, the man who can. And Lou himself now is striking out on his own, and he's just become an advisor to the government, which is what I said he was all along. He just never stopped, except for that brief period when he played the role of an outraged CIA agent who wanted to get the truth out, because, you know, the CIA is all about the truth.
Oh, absolutely.
Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is the State of the Union. Of course, a couple of weeks ago, we did X100, Part 1, which was all about Ghislaine Maxwell in the hot zone. And we are going to do Part 2 on that. There's a lot of major things that are in that episode that we're going to follow up on.
It's building.
And it's actually a 3-parter, which is the interesting thing there. In between, we got these major Fitz episodes, which we were originally going to put up on YouTube. Had some issues uploading the first one, and then took it as a sign after all the things that Fitz has been going through, which is extreme censorship. And I think we should all be aware of that, and everyone should visit Solari.com for updates on all the things that Catherine is doing. And for viewing those 2 interviews, if you haven't seen them yet, just sign up for the Dark Journalist newsletter, and we'll send them to you. They're free. And you literally, the link will just come right off the newsletter. The key thing that I think is the takeaway from the section that we just went over has to do with Catherine Austin Fitz and RFK Jr., who are being paired up, lined up, and targeted in this press play. Because, you know, as Catherine said, they can't have someone like her, who previously they approved of and wanted to be on the New York Fed board and had in a cabinet position for the government. You know, for her to come out now and be exposing the government is a little different than somebody, you know, who's just a researcher doing it. She obviously has that kind of clout. RFK Jr. is a really big problem because of his family connections and because of his own background of exposing companies like Monsanto and winning in court. Remember, he's an excellent environmental lawyer as well. So Children's Health Defense really opening up the conversation around the injections and the lockdowns and all this stuff is something that they can't abide. So they're going to have to reach in there on the media side and risk exposing themselves to paint these individuals who can turn the conversation. Now, we've seen them do this with other people, American frontline doctors, for example, who are having great success. And Dr. Nicole Gold, who really, you know, now is... Simone Gold, yes. Thank you. Simone did a number of things that were really quite remarkable. If you follow her speeches, she's really outlined the whole program around what we're seeing, and I highly, highly recommend her work. Now, she was there during the January 6th deep event, and she was actually invited to give a speech there. And so we all know the strange things that got the media going there, like the whole provocateur aspect, which we've talked about on this program extensively. But these things opened up so that the FBI could charge her and question her and all this type of stuff. So she now has a legal fund. So they're taking the most articulate voices on the subject and trying to bully them, silence them, or discredit them. And we've seen this all the way back to Jim Garrison's investigation of the JFK assassination, which, by the way, is going through quite a transformation in the media as well, as they're trying again to change people's minds about what took place. in the JFK assassination, this is an incident from 57 years ago that the media and the CIA have not been able to change a majority of Americans' minds about at all. So we've seen some very interesting things. One thing I wanted to mention on that is that Oliver Stone, who did the incredible JFK movie in 1992, actually, that film was responsible for getting the Assassination Record Review Board out there. And that's what gave us the deadline for the Kennedy records, which were supposed to be released October 26, 2017. And we're still waiting for them. The CIA convinced Trump not to release the full batch, although he released some. And part of the batch that they have are the Garrison records, which is what I think is so interesting about that treasure trove. But there's a lot there with JFK records that aren't even part of that congressional mandate. There's a set of records that the reporter Jefferson Morley found out about and is in court over, and has had an ongoing court case for 12 years trying to get those records, of someone who ran the Oswald Project, who was a real psychological operator inside the CIA. So we've had a lot of strange ups and downs with that. However, October 2021 is when they're supposed to release those records on the CIA side. That's when the Trump initiative that the CIA convinced him to do in 2017 moved that out to. So now there's the question, are they going to release those records in October of 2021? And so this sets the stage for all sorts of things that we're seeing. So part of this is that Oliver Stone came out and he said, well, look, I'm doing a 4-hour in-depth documentary series on everything I've learned since I put out the JFK movie some 30 years ago. Now, we can only imagine the types of things that he's been able to build on since that, and it's really quite remarkable. So originally, Netflix and National Geographic were bidding on this whole thing, etc. And there was an announcement that went out that this 4-part series was going to appear there. Suddenly, they were like, oh, we're applying fact checkers, and we've decided that this is not, a fact check thing, so we won't distribute it in the United States. We're going to keep it off our platforms. So now this very incredible 4-hour documentary series by Stone on the real aspects of the JFK assassination is not being made widely available by those channels, National Geographic or Netflix. So it is going to premiere at the Cannes Film Festival in July of 2021. And from there, we need a way to get that mass distributed inside the United States, because I can tell you that there are deep, deep revelations in that series. So we're going to be watching closely on that. In the meantime, James Woolsey, who is the CIA director under Clinton and also had a role in a part of the Fitz shenanigans back in the late 90s, inviting her in to be part of this think tank, basically, for what would happen if the ET reality were revealed to humanity. He's come out with a book, and he said, well, actually it was the Soviets that assassinated JFK, and they programmed Lee Harvey Oswald to do it. Well, this is fascinating, right? Because, of course, the CIA are the ones who were known to program assassins, and they're also the ones who were running Oswald. So very interesting push around the JFK story that we've been seeing just in the past couple of weeks here, and some strange pushback on some of these pieces. Now, let's look at the UFO piece, because it's so in our face and it's so linked in with what we're seeing with the coronavirus push and that real incredible, kind of fascist. You can just feel it at the margins everywhere you go. There's that fascist feeling leaning in. We hear about the idea that they want to mandate these injectables. We hear about them trying to mandate it for children going to school or someone who's working at Starbucks. And we hear about them trying to strip all types of freedoms from Americans and people around the world. And so this is just the nature of how we've started 2021, along with the shenanigans and the circus around the election. But the UFO piece, in my opinion, is the biggest piece of the op, because if you thought the coronavirus op was something, you ain't seen nothing yet. And we're going to get into that through Marco Rubio. our friend from Miami.
Say
Little
it.
Marco.
Little Marco. He'll never live it
as
down.
Trump called him in 2016. And they had some of the most juvenile debate back and forths of all time. But once you let yourself get into that level with Trump, you're toast, as many people have found out. You don't want to mess with someone who has the street smarts of Godzilla. Okay. All right. First of all, I want us to note the media entity that put this one out. TMZ. TMZ is usually, waiting there for like Beyonce, X to come out and give the dirt on her. I mean, this is an interesting place to go with this story. Senator Marco Rubio to TMZ in an interview. Let's ID the UFOs flying over military bases. The truth is out there. I kid you not. That's the X-Files tagline, in case you haven't forgotten.
And they think it's so unoriginal. Can't they come up with something else?
That is Marco Rubio going for it. Now, Rubio in the UFO file is an interesting exercise because he is the key point man. We have to ask ourselves, how did he suddenly, as someone who's on the Intelligence Committee for the Senate, get the reins of being the UFO file point man? That is the person who the media goes to, the person who's trying to make allocations in the budget, the person who is trying to get a UFO threat program as part of our military DoD exercise. All right. Well, Rubio, if you go into any of these stories about the UAP task force, and again, UAP is unidentified aerial phenomena, which is the word that's supposed to replace UFO, which is actually a much better term because it's much more well known. But they need to rebrand everything. Just like, remember, America was going to be the homeland after they created the Department of Homeland Security and all the rest. They need a new name because when you have a new name, you can ascribe all sorts of things. Like, for example, the United States of America has a constitution. It says the citizens are in charge, and it says that they can remove public officials who don't obey the Constitution. But Homeland is just some kind of a weird freak show where COG, can come in and run the show, and you can have strange things like the Patriot Act, and you can be tracked on flights and all the rest. So the naming convention is very important. So when you go from UFO, which people associate with a government cover-up, to UAP, which is something that they can run the CIA UFO threat op through, it's different. We start to get the clarity. And then again, Rubio on Pentagon UFO report. There's stuff flying over military installations. Well, that's an understatement, Marco. And then the Toronto Sun. Florida Senator Marco Rubio goes full-on Roswell, talking UFO amid hints at blockbuster alien news this summer. And then, because there is this UAP task force report that's supposed to come out as part of the coronavirus budget. This was required. They snuck it in there and said, you have to bring out this UFO info. But it's all done in such a cloak and dagger way that all it means is that those agencies have to they have to give exchanges to each other. The public doesn't have anything to do with it, but the media can keep riding it. And then out of the blue, now this thing is supposed to come out in June, and we've been hearing a lot about it, and people have been, everywhere from Fox to CNN to MSNBC. They just love that UFO subject. They can't get enough. But Rubio says UFO report might miss deadline. So, this is a man who knows. So what we have is an interesting connection here. Suddenly, whenever we go to UFOs, it was Harry Reid for a while, who was the retired senator who worked through NAB and, Lou and all these people, and it was supposed to be Harry Reid's giving us disclosure. But as it turned out, that wasn't really flying for a lot of people, because most of the people who know Harry Reid know him as Dirty Harry because of the kind of politics that he practiced. And they wouldn't expect the truth from a guy like that who ran Nevada, after all, not exactly known as a bellwether for honesty, and largely mafia run for its long history, founded by the mafia. still a great place to go, still a great place to be, but nonetheless, the politics there are very, very shady. And so what we have is they needed something else. They needed some kind of a new approach, just like they needed to get rid of that pesky TTSA that, had all these CIA people, and it was just too obvious an operation. And in the meantime, the UFO field were bowing down to these people and just said, include us in your book tours and your documentaries, and made a fool out of themselves. And now these people have just kind of moved on. Like Mellon, with all of his billions, has gone back into the woodwork. Since Biden became president, Elizondo has also kind of gone his own way. And so he's not part of TTSA. Neither is Steve Justice, who was their big kind of linchpin for technology at Lockheed Martin. So the main brain trust of their group is gone. They have $50 million in debt and a weird snuffed up rock star, ex-rock star from the 90s, hanging out at the top of that, not even really talking about UFOs anymore. God forbid the people who invested in that company thinking they were going to get something out of it. How many times on this program do we point out to you the inconsistencies of weird CIA money laundering that take place? Even the SEC warned us about this company. So, they thought it was shady dealings, and that's what we've been seeing. Now, God knows what they'll end up doing, but in terms of what I'm talking about, honest UFO disclosure for the public, it was just a CIA exercise. And, as far as like people involved with that company, I could care less. But the point is, in terms of what they were presenting it as and what they were pushing it as, we can all see now collectively that it failed. And those people that were so on board with them and were like, if you give the TTSA a hard time, you're giving disclosure a hard time, have been proven wrong. And, I don't take any great pleasure in saying that, but it's a fact. And we pointed it out. It's a CIA exercise. They identified themselves on the board as CIA people. Chisemi Van, who ran the company, was a 25-year CIA agent in some of the most clandestine work ever done by the CIA. Why is he going to give you, the public, the average person interested in UFOs, secret details about his CIA career with UFOs? Doesn't make any sense. So this was an exercise, and when we look at that, we have to take the "don't get fooled again" kind of credo with us into these subjects, because what they did is they figured out, we try to shut them down in UFOs over and over again. Now we can take the fact that it's the very top Google search, at least it was in 2018, 2019, and use it to our advantage, because the next op that we do beyond this pandemic type stuff is going to be this alien op, which they're definitely building in the media. And it's something which we're getting into deeply tonight. Somehow they've elected Marco Rubio to be the point man. And of course, he's the senator from Florida, deep in the hot zone. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Here we are with the State of the Union, giving you the facts around how the UFO threat is going to be used as yet another measure to try and control the population through the media and through this political push that's going on. Now, I want to read to you a very interesting interview with Maria Bartiromo from Fox News, who's been really
She's
News,
very excited about UFOs.
She can't get enough. She used to be that used to be a business show. Now it's like, an X-Files hang up. Pretty soon she'll be like, and my next special is on Apotheum. Here we go. All right. Below is the transcript of the UFO discussion between Fox Business host Maria Bartiromo and Senator Marco Rubio 2 days ago. Senator, I want to turn to unidentified objects in the air. I had an exclusive interview with the former director of national intelligence, John Radcliffe. We're going to get to him in a minute. The other night on Fox News, where I asked him about this upcoming Pentagon report, which of course you've commissioned or encouraged to have a report on these unidentified objects. Have unidentified flying objects been seen? It's a pretty good chance that they have. Senator Marco Rubio, yes, we're sure we have lots of reports about what we call unidentified aerial phenomena, rebranding there, UAP. There are a lot more sightings than have been made public. Sometimes we wonder whether or not our adversaries have technologies that are a little bit further down the road than we thought we realized. Our adversaries, who are you talking about? Okay, so our adversaries would be Russia, China, India. Is that what you mean? Or do you mean our adversaries, the aliens? So, Senator, what about that? What can you tell us about UFOs? Well, we have things flying over military installations, over military exercises and other places, and we don't know what it is. It isn't ours. It isn't anything that's registered with the FAA, and in many cases exhibits attributes of things. We've never seen technology like this, the kinds of technology we haven't seen before. At least that's what it seems like. I think you have to know what it is, or we have to try to know what it is. Does this mean UFOs and aliens are extraterrestrials? We don't have to go so far. It's very simple. There are things flying over national security installations, and we don't know what they are. And this goes on, and it's a game of footsie of, are there aliens? And him saying, well, you know, we have to find out, and we need that money for a UFO threat. It's TTSA language without the wait till our next reveal next week. Get ready. So he was doing this whole bit. So now we have Maria Bartiromo. We've got TMZ. So he obviously has a press list across the board for this. You know, we're seeing him CNN, all the rest. So why are they rolling out Rubio? Well, a lot of people in looking at this, what we're seeing is that basically they say Rubio noticed that this was coming up again and again, and then he made it part of this bill in 2020. And then he just, you know, out of the blue figured this out since the New York Times reports and all the rest. Not so fast. A couple of interesting things about Marco Rubio, which are also true about Lou, which is their parents are both Cuban dissidents. And in this case, Rubio's parents came over here in 1956 from Cuba. Now, Rubio would claim that they fled Fidel Castro's revolution, but that happened in 1959. So he wanted this image of, you know, the Free Cuba Brigade and this kind of thing. In the case of Lou, his dad actually took place in the failed Bay of Pigs CIA invasion that President Kennedy, you know, made sure the CIA didn't trick him into invading the island of Cuba, but nonetheless, that force that they sent in there got captured. This is a major piece of hot zone geopolitics. And when we look at it, it involves a lot of the major players around the UFO file, oddly enough. So there's something there when we're talking about the hot zone area, which involves the UFO file very deeply. As we know, there's a lot of geopolitics around the secrets of the hot zone. And one of the things that I want to highlight, and that I've been highlighting the past couple of programs, is that this is the decade for the hot zone. The secrets that are encased there, whether it's ancient ruins, UFO bases, AUTIC, which is the underwater Area 51, for the testing of advanced weaponry and other things by the United States government, which is right off Andros Island. You know, that there's going to be so many secrets coming to light based around land rising there. And this whole process that's been in place and moving forward, it goes back to the Casey readings, the mystery school influence telling us that these things were going to happen in this particular period of time. This is really going to be in many ways called the decade of the hot zone. Absolutely certain of it. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're going deep here in the State of the Union, getting to the UFO file mystery and the Apotheum global control. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. They're going to use this UFO file revelation as another means for global control, and they're putting that apparatus in place. And this is the kind of thing that we need to be paying attention to, not how is that vaccine being allocated? Are enough people being able to get access it in rural areas? You know, this is the kind of false back and forth there that they have going on in the media. Should we have reparations? Really raising all these things. In the meantime, they're building an entire space net around the planet to control everything from space, including farming, by the way, and we're going to get into that as well. I wanted to remind you, when you're at the darkjournalist.com website, sign up for the newsletter. It's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch with the incredible, and I mean phenomenal, takedown that we've been seeing. Yes.
I hate to say it. It's only a matter of time before the YouTube channel's gone.
Well, we don't know.
Well, I know.
Of course, you're right. You're absolutely right. You could, but the thing is that it's their move on that stuff, and that's fine with me. I'm just going to continue to do the things that I'm going to do. But yeah, it's a good point.
When that happens,
yes,
you're going to want to have access to the newsletter information.
Excellent point. Fantastic point. Mm-hmm. Right. And the newsletter, basically, you get it in your inbox about once a week. It's just going to tell you what shows are available with direct links for the videos right there, and the incredible, and I mean incredible, interviews and shows that we have coming up for you in April and May. It's going to be a mind blower. So you're going to want that information, and you're going to want to be a member of the site. Okay. Moving forward. I want to remind you that we're going to take questions here in the second half of the program coming up. So you can ask them in caps, and Miss Olivia is going to be
I'm taking them down.
really running the show on that. Before we go any further, how's the temperature out there?
It's good. I think people are, my sense is that people are over their trauma to a great extent, and they are working through their fear, and they're starting to get empowered and think constructively about working in groups and what are we going to do, and taking action.
Yeah,
it's all about. But what kind of action? I think there's some serious deliberation that needs to take place.
Well, after the deep state beatdown of the lockdowns and the circus election and all that, there's no question that it dented the collective spirit, but people having time to process it, you do see them getting on. I've seen a lot of that myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, incredible. Well, the ideas room is flowing with great ideas tonight, and so we're going to get to all your questions. Let's keep going with Rubio here until we get to the bottom of why he is suddenly the UFO point man in all this. Yes.
So Ed Kaufman has a bunch of great questions about Rubio.
Yes.
And his connections to former TTSA people, the Bigelow Group, and anti-Castro Cubans that were involved in Operation Condor. Are we going to get into any of these?
Well, the last one he has a definite connection to. In terms of TTSA, the only thing I can really discover is that Rubio, when he injected the UAP task force into the coronavirus bill from the Senate Intelligence Committee, used the same term, advanced aerial threats, as the program that Lou said he ran, which has never been confirmed, and which the military has said, oh, he was a part of the program, but he didn't run it, which is quite a difference. So he used the same, ATIP was the program name that Elizondo came out with, and they varied that name too, but Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program is basically what it ended up being. And so for Rubio to use the same language tells us that the briefing he was getting, we have to put these dots together. Lou is now a government consultant, as I said he was all along, all right? And I don't think he's now a government consultant. I think he has been a government consultant all the way through because he was in the CIA for 20 years. Frankly, where do you go with those types of credentials? You go back to the government and you become a consultant. So he never left his job, and that whole thing about him leaving disgruntled was part of the PR to try to get TTSA off the ground and maybe make a Hollywood movie, whatever it was. But in any case, what does come out of this for us is that the language that Lou came out with for ATIP is the same language that Rubio put in the bill. And also that there is something in Mellon's background, who is also no longer part of TTSA, the billionaire defense official from the Bush administration, who was a part of TTSA and was in the series and all that. He's now bowed out, and he has some relationship to Rubio, but that's where I think you're going to find those links. The other weird thing is that Podesta, John Podesta, who was behind launching the TTSA op in many ways in its association with the Hillary Clinton campaign, became an interim advisor for the Biden administration. A lot of people haven't talked about that, but I've discovered that in looking at the Biden transition team. Okay. Rubio, well, they said that it was the New York Times story that got him interested, and eventually that he got briefings in government and all the rest. Gee, I wonder who gave him those briefings. But that was 2017. So here's a story of Rubio. This is from January 29th, 2016. And it kind of blows away that whole New York thing, the New York Times UFO report and how Rubio would get interested in it. This one from Fox, actually CNN. Marco Rubio, feds need land for aliens. Clinton also makes UFO joke. This is 2016. But unprompted, Rubio, during a debate and then an after debate talk, starts talking about aliens and how federal land needs to be allocated for aliens. I kid you not. Senator Marco Rubio is finally admitting where the bodies are buried. The alien ones, that is. The Florida Republican presidential candidate jokingly revealed a federal alien facility during a sit-down with the Des Moines Register. So aliens have been on the mind there. And we could say, this is a joke that he was making, but it didn't come up. It wasn't like they asked him about UFOs and he started making jokes. He just starts talking about UFOs out of nowhere in January of 2016, way before the New York Times article or the TTSA founding in 2017. Quote, in the state of Nevada, the United States federal government owns an extensive amount of land, and some of it's legitimately in the possession of the United States, Rubio began in seriousness. We have a significant testing range out there, he added. Deadpanning, obviously we have Area 51 where we keep the alien bodies. So this whole bit about Rubio and making UFO jokes and stuff and bringing this subject out, talking about federal facilities, starts to be like an alien connection with Rubio talking about it way before he gets to being the major point man on the UAP task force. He continues. So they keep the alien bodies there. I'm just kidding. That's not true. Rubio's joke was not the first time aliens have come up in the 2016 trail. Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton pledged to get to the bottom of UFOs in an interview in New Hampshire in a tongue-in-cheek response to a question from a reporter. Her husband, former President Bill Clinton, and senior advisor John Podesta have also joked about aliens in the past. The senator agreed that the government owns too much land, bringing up the early voting state of Nevada as an example repeatedly, but said citizens can't be lawless. He said whether or not the men are breaking the law is not up to him. If they are, they should be prosecuted. So a very strange little tangle there, but it shows us Rubio already talking oddly about aliens, etc., Area 51 in 2016, before all of this stuff came up. Here's another piece. Space politics. Senator Rubio urges Congress to keep Florida as a major part in space exploration. Keep in mind that Rubio ran for president in 2016. Expecting to make some headway and be the candidate, and actually he hung in there pretty long. Florida leaders and politicians are applauding NASA for landing the Perseverance rover on Mars, showing support for the program's space exploration initiatives. Senator Marco Rubio praised NASA and called the program a source of unity and pride for the nation. The recent success may open up new possibilities and economic benefits for the state, he said. America's future is pointed to the sky, with Florida serving as the nation's gateway to the stars. Now, there is a lot of NASA money, and Cape Canaveral, of course, has the huge space economy piece. But I think we have to look at Rubio as the representative of the financial wealth factor gained from the UFO threat aspect. In other words, if he can shepherd through a UFO threat through the Senate Intelligence Committee and make this UAP task force say, oh, there is a threat, and get the media on board, then they have the first wing of it. They have the funding to defend against enemy aliens. The next piece is the alien lockdown coronavirus thing. They have a whole op dressed up for this, or they wouldn't be pushing it so hard. And the idea of control from space is something that goes all the way back to the Nazi plan when they were originally looking at this. That they realized that satellites, et cetera, were coming because they were the first ones who were inventing these way back there in the Third Reich. The plan for space control has been out there for a long time, and the battle over space has been ongoing. We've seen some incredible things like the moon program being shut down in 1972, for example. That's 50 years come next year of no travel to the moon. And suddenly, under the Space Force and President Trump, last year they announced, we're going back to the moon, 2024. And Pence was the point man for the whole thing. So what's missing here is that there's been a battle at the federal level over the UFO file for 75 years. Biggest flashpoints, JFK's assassination, that period when he wanted to share it with the Russians. We had Douglas Caddy on this program, who's the Watergate lawyer, whose best friend was E. Howard Hunt, the top CIA spy master, who confessed to him in private that JFK was assassinated because he wanted to give our biggest national secret away to the Russians, which was the UFO file. Other flashpoints, Nixon's time capsule. Nixon's push for disclosure. Nixon funded a movie for disclosure in 1972. It eventually came out, and he had to withdraw from being involved in the big disclosure push of the early 70s because of Watergate. Jimmy Carter had UFO sightings, opened up all kinds of UFO reports via FOIA. President Reagan had Star Wars and inserted aliens as often as possible in his UN speeches to try to get us in the habit of at least exploring the topic. Had ET screened at the White House. I mean, how much more obvious messaging can you get than that? That was pretty good. And said after the screening, and Steven Spielberg remembered this, we all know that what we just watched is fact, not fiction. So these moves have been there in the UFO file. The Clintons have always tried to get at it. They've always been on the periphery. They're not very big insiders, although on the crime drug side, they got inside with that. But on the UFO stuff, they're largely left out. The Bushes are hardcore in the ex-protect vein of protecting the secret of the UFO file. And they've been on that team for, 60, 70 years. When you get into other presidents, like Obama, Obama's too much of a puppet to really say anything about in relation to the alien factor, because he always did what he was told. He was there as the clerk for the bankers. And he came in basically as this type of figure that had been carefully crafted for a long time. So there's nothing really about Obama and the UFO file that's particularly important. Trump, however, had astounding connections with the UFO file. Roy Cohn, who was Trump's lawyer and political mentor, is like an ultimate deep state character. And his connection to a group called DISC, which is Defense Intelligence Security Command, which is completely about this advanced X technology and the kind of UFO activity of the 60s, that whole piece, which was released in a WikiLeaks type disclosure, something called the Torbit document in the early 1970s, this is a major link and connection. And then if you go a little bit further with Trump, as we have an episode out there, Tesla, Trump, and the Time Capsule, that I highly recommend, because it documents, and I went into it deeply because I couldn't believe a lot of it myself, but it goes beyond just Trump's uncle and his association with the Tesla file, which is pretty dramatic, as he was called in by Vannevar Bush, who was then heading up the science for the government under FDR. And when Tesla died in 1943, they called in John Trump because Vannevar Bush had been his mentor. But what we learned about Vannevar Bush is that he had been the one who was in charge of the UFO file the whole time. His understudy, his protege, was John Trump at MIT. And so John Trump, knowing he's a kind of a triple threat because he knows about the X technology through Tesla, and he also knows about the UFO file. And then his nephew becomes president. So we have to get it in our heads that Trump knows an exceptional amount about the UFO file, not to mention his close relationship with Richard Nixon, which was heavily detailed on this program through the X series, and only came out September of 2020 because the Richard Nixon Library let those letters out that revealed a previously unknown relationship between Nixon and Trump. Well, it wasn't previously unknown to people who watched the X series. We've been telling you about that since 2017. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're going deep here in the X State of the Union. It's March 26th, and 2021 has been a very unusual start of the year. There's no question about it. We have a very unusual leadership situation because many people view the current administration as a usurper because of the very strange election that it followed from. And we've been going into this in detail and trying to find ways to see where they're taking this party. I want to remind you to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for our newsletter. That keeps us in touch, which we've discussed tonight is so important. And it allows us to have that pipeline with each other. Now, moving forward, I want to now take all of that information about Marco Rubio and try to connect it with some of the hot zone aspects that Rubio has, which I think are important. And also, I think that Rubio becomes a very important person to watch politically leading up to 2024 as well. By the way, largely identified as a hawk and with hawks, suggesting we bomb Iran and things of this nature. So not exactly a peacenik, but really kind of a hawkish conservative Republican. All right. Let's try to get a handle on this. This is an unusual report, and I'll track all these things back. The hot zone is an area which exists between the coast of Florida, Bimini, the Yucatan Peninsula, right in that stretch to Cuba. That whole area is something which is known by people who work in that area as the hot zone. If you're in the military or if you're in a private sector company that maps the ocean floor, we've discovered that that's the term that they use because what happens is when people go to work in that area, they have to sign non-disclosure forms. And they're legal forms that say if you see any ruins or anything unusual under there, you can't disclose it. So if you work for a company and you contract for them and you're doing something for the oceans and you see this stuff, that area is called the hot zone. If you see something, you can actually, if you're in the military, you can be court-martialed. If you're a private citizen, you can be sued, and there are legal penalties. So they've built that in there. In a series of programs, we've gone over the hot zone, what it is, and how it got, there's a long history there going all the way back to Ernest Hemingway and Thomas Townsend Brown and other characters. But basically, inside the mystery schools, they discuss this quite a bit about this area, giving clues out to the public about it through the work of Edgar Cayce and other people like the Anthroposophical Society and Theosophy, telling us that that area was particularly important and that there would be land rising there. Now, the area is important because there was an ancient advanced culture that existed there, which these governments have known about and have geopolitically, gone back and forth and basically played a game over the last 80, 90 years of trying to assert themselves over these findings. Now, there's a lot of reasons to do that, and there's a lot of things going on in the hot zone relating to drugs, relating to the military, So these things are all in the mix when you're dealing with it. However, the hot zone aspect has to do with what's under the water. And that's why we have a group like AUTEC right off the coast of Cuba there and on the island of Andros. Then we start to see, oh, they're underwater Area 51, and we see all these UFO sightings. It starts to put us in mind about why that corridor of the Bahamas and into Bimini and that whole area is such a hot zone for weird activity and ancient discoveries like the Bimini Wall, which had been predicted by the American psychic Edgar Cayce. All right, this is a report on AUTEC that comes from someone named Dr. Michael Priesinger. Let's get into a little bit of this. U.S. Navy's AUTEC base, Atlantic Undersea Testing and Evaluation Center, which is what the acronym stands for, continue to appear. Have ufologists been on the wrong scent hitherto and constantly assuming that the wreckage of crashed UFOs was all in the hands of the U.S. Air Force? Fresh pieces of information actually go further than that, even suggesting that there is already an official contact. That is saying we're communicating with an off-world civilization. Fresh pieces of information actually go further than that. This two-part report will, on the other hand, shed light on the picture. I'm just going to point out a couple of things that he says, part of it relating to Charles Berlitz, who we covered in the episode X100, Ghislaine in the Hot Zone. All right. This is from the Bermuda Puzzle Solved. I will first give a resume of the situation. On the island of Andros in the Bahamas, lying between Nassau and Florida in the hot zone, the U.S. Navy has a strictly guarded secret submarine research center. Andros being chosen owing to the great sea depth immediately right off its east coast, a straight drop of no more than 2,000 miles from the ocean bed. Tourists and other visitors are more or less non-existent, and hardly anybody ever seems to know exactly how big the secret base is. But recently there have been enough rumors and reports that make it reasonable to believe that this base, that via this base, official contacts with visitors from other worlds or other dimensions are actually taking place. It's a big claim, but let's see how it shakes out. In his book, Charles Berlitz wrote, in quantity, the reports of UFO sightings over the Florida Bahamas region far exceed those from other areas of the world. Many reliable eyewitnesses have seen the UFOs both in the air and clean, clear ocean water. They have been seen disappearing down into the area and emerging from it, and the high index of sightings in this region suggests that the UFOs are indeed connected with the mishaps to people in the area, and that they are abducting ships and aircraft there, and that this has been going on for generations past. Now, interestingly enough, J. Allen Hynek pointed out the area of the hot zone is the most visited of anywhere on Earth. Think about that. So we're dealing with a major UFO hotbed of activity there. We're dealing with the ruins of a lost advanced culture there. And we are dealing with an area that produces all kinds of unknown, unusual magnetic anomalies. That is known as the Bermuda Triangle on one side, but that area extends actually outside the triangle, and the triangle overlaps directly with the hot zone. We also have the unusual thing, of course, of Epstein Island and Ghislaine's presence down there, and also her company, Terramar, which, let me tell you, was basically a very well-funded cover for searching for these ruins. And we're going to see more and more companies and expose more and more companies that are doing this. And I'm telling you, when people talk about UFO disclosure and things of this nature, I understand grasping for that. Or they talk about, hey, we're going to find out about Antarctica. But let me tell you, the odds of you and I getting to Antarctica or outer space are incredibly limited. And we're never going to be able, we're just going to have to take somebody else's word for what's taking place. The hot zone, however, is really right there off the coast of Florida. And can you just imagine a civilian network of people who are trying to keep in touch with each other around this great understanding that we're getting through the mystery schools and through the research that we're doing. What is going to happen if regular people get their hands on this? This would be the equivalent of like a UFO landing in the middle of a farmer's field and the whole town coming there before the military and anybody can get their hands on it. Because in areas like Bimini and in areas like the Yucatan, there are extensive ruins and there are extensive things connected with these subjects of an ancient lost culture and some of the advanced technology that they possessed. The idea that there are UFO bases, well, David Zink, who was one of the premier researchers on the hot zone, who was around mostly in the 70s and 80s, and did the great book, The Stones of Atlantis. Well, he knew the natives there on Bimini referred to UFO sightings as fireflies, and they would see them coming out of the ocean all the time. So there was some kind of an underground base going on there. It makes a lot of sense that AUTEC is down there observing these things. Okay, a little more from this AUTEC report. There's a lot of good cases, and a lot of them are around Bimini, but I'm going to mention just a couple of things that catch my eye about this area, as it seems to be that the premier ship for the area is the cigar-shaped ship. Interestingly enough, if you study some of the reports down there in the Bahamas also, you will notice that they compare them, some of the UFOs, to looking like really gigantic buses, which is also kind of like a cigar-shaped, but it's with windows. And there's a report from a party boat, literally, where everybody was sort of, looking up, partying in the Bahamas, and this thing goes by. But I'll read just a couple of these. A large terrace-shaped vessel in the channel between Abaco and Eleuthera. The thing was brightly lit up, but did not show up on the radar scope. On the evening of August 2nd, 1975, a scientist, Jim Thorne, and a diver, Walt Hendrick, on the beach at Bimini saw a star in the sky that suddenly started to move. It came right towards them, hovered overhead, moved to and fro sideways, then moved off and hovered over various areas of the sea and island. The star's light was bluish, and its speed of movement estimated several 100,000 kilometers. The sighting had lasted about 3 minutes. In the 1970s, at Dr. Hynek's UFO Research Center in Evanston, new films of UFOs over the Bahamas were shown. That region was now being discussed as one of the world's principal UFO centers. This is very important because I think when we talk about this area, they had a greater understanding in this period of the 70s and 80s about what that was all about, and they were able to move that off the front page, so that all of these people who were really doing work out there, Berlitz, Zink, all of the extensive attention that was being paid to Bimini because of the Bimini Wall and the Bermuda Triangle, that once that all got out of the way, everybody's direction is always Area 51, and they got them thinking about, Area 51, it's got everything. And in fact, it left this whole mystery just literally hanging out in space. J. Manson Valentine, who had discovered the Bimini Wall, he has UFO sightings over the area. And let's not forget that Manson Valentine, who found the Bimini Wall, he was best friends with Morris K. Jessup. And Jessup is the premier astronomer, UFO researcher of the 50s, who dies mysteriously after bringing out the details of the Philadelphia experiment. So, these things start to make sense when you string them together with the intense technology programs that are active. What I refer to as that technology, we call it X technology, which is something that the government is holding. But the effect of the X technology, far beyond just being some super energy system, and people say, well, if we had UFOs, we'd have breakthrough energy. That's what the problem is. Well, I think part of the problem is something that we've termed Apotheum in this program. And the spelling of it is Apotheum. Apotheum is the effect that happens as a result of the use of aspects of this technology. This happened a long time ago in civilizations history and record. It's recorded as the deluge of Atlantis. This is the upheaval. This is the pole shift. It's all of these things. The comet strike. It is the apotheum of the situation. In Casey's version of that story, and again, Casey's version of Atlantis runs deep and gives us that mystery school vision of what this was about. It wasn't just some ancient culture where a bunch of people walked around dressed like Greeks. They were just as advanced or more advanced than we are now. This is Casey's version of it. And he talks about these centers and the two-eye stone, which they ran the crystal centers. Whatever happened, he said that they tuned these forces too high. That's what creates these incredible inundations and the strange magnetic anomalies in that area of the world. He said that that portion of Atlantis was called Poseidia, and that's the piece that's down there off the Caribbean in the hot zone. So that aspect of Apotheum is kept through civilizations. They remember it. They remember the effect of this thing. There's some way to manipulate the Earth's magnetic core to achieve all these incredible things. There's some aspect of the X technology that is related to that. That's why it comes out of not just Tesla's work, but Keely's work at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. When we go further, we start to identify these things, we find ourselves face to face with the fact that the same types of strange things that occur around the X technology occur whenever the UFO visitors show up. People walk through walls, entire towns get blacked out, plants won't grow. So there's an incredible physics disruption that takes place whenever these things are seen. And then if you had studied some of the really good classic people like John Mack on the UFO file, most of the cases, when they get abducted, it's not just they're driving and they get abducted. It's that the car floats up into the ship, or the people get abducted through their bedroom wall, out into a ship. So all normal ideas of time and dimension and physicality are suspended whenever these visitors are around. So to just merely track it as saying, hey, there's some group out there that has advanced technology beyond us and they're flying around in our skies, misses this whole Apotheum effect. The Apotheum part, I think, is very important for us to get a handle on, because it is, in essence, the reason behind the intense secrecy around the UFO file. The idea that these groups, one of the groups is called X Protect, that we've identified in this program, who would do anything to protect that secret, would suddenly give it up to the New York Times or Marco Rubio, is hilarious. What's happening is, behind the scenes, there's a gigantic struggle over that UFO file in government, and we've been tracking that here on this program. And what we've been getting from that battle between that advanced technology is that there's a group that is not only concerned about keeping that secret to themselves, they're concerned about the Apotheum effect itself, which, our friend Dr. Joseph Farrell likes to say that the effects of this kind of physics makes the atomic bomb look like a firecracker. We have to kind of keep that in the mix as to understanding what they think, that they can't control it exactly, that they don't have a complete handle on it. I think is an important piece for us to keep in mind. I think the naive kind of Nick Pope, nothing against anybody, but this side of the thing that was tried, the entertainment op around UFOs, the kind of blasé Nick Pope, maybe the British government will give us some little document somewhere, or the UAP task force is going to release real UFOs. The thing is, they have a disclosure in mind, but it is CIA disclosure, and we have to make sure mentally we understand the difference. Because to disclose something like that the wrong way, to their own advantage, would be a great distortion for humanity, as opposed to the great discovery that it could be. And we have to keep that in mind when it comes to the discovery of the great Atlantean culture as well, in its advanced technology. These two things run completely parallel in terms of humanity's consciousness. and reclaiming that. And this is definitely the period, without a doubt, that's been identified by the mystery schools over time, telling us this is what's coming. There's going to be a great upheaval in human consciousness about this. But the way that it's done is absolutely crucial. And unfortunately, in the world that we're living in, where you have the Covidian cult and you have these insane leaders and you have the tech bosses and the Davos crowd who want to harvest humanity and have you walk around with ankle bracelets for taking a flight, this is really, we're moving into facing not just the incredible political corruption, but a much larger picture of ourselves in the sense of the world and the relationship of the world to the universe. So all these things are happening at once, and it takes us from a horse and buggy situation in 1909 to going to the moon in 1969, to stop going to the moon in 1972 and wait 50 years. So what happened between 1972 and 2021? That whole thing about the secret space program, this is the thing that they've been developing. They have created the infrastructure with our money, and they have created a gigantic privatization of that infrastructure. So they know a lot more about this subject than we do. So as I've said, there's two ways for us to kind of keep our hands on this, which is one, we don't include the Central Intelligence Agency in any kind of UFO disclosures because they are masters of deception. It's a crucial piece. And that's why UFO researchers don't get it, and why deep state researchers, they understand the UFO, they understand the CIA aspect, and very often the deep state researchers won't go anywhere near the UFO stuff, because they think of it as just this far out stuff, because those researchers in the UFO field don't ground themselves understanding the incredible duplicity of the CIA. And so they wander around constantly being manipulated by the CIA, which was recently done with the entertainment program called TTSA. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. I'm just about to bring up Lou, so this is good timing. This is great. This is the ex-State of the Union president, and I use the term loosely, Biden, has not given a press conference until Thursday.
Because people were starting to ask questions about it.
No question. And here's the thing. The State of the Union usually happens January 30th, somewhere in there. Doesn't happen much later than that, ever. I mean, maybe early February. So here we are in late March, and there's no talk about it because Biden can't handle it. So we're in a weird situation there where they don't want to admit it. They've also talked, incidentally, about taking away the ability for Biden to have the the nuclear codes and the UFO codes, probably. That is a very dangerous state of affairs because in the Constitution, the president is the commander-in-chief, even this figurehead. So the idea that they would give some committee the ability to hold the nuclear football basically turns us into a communist-style government. And that's just completely against the American system. It also shows, though, in my opinion, that they were after this. They were starting to build this around the end of the Trump term, and it was a very strange suggestion. And they started to float it out there and be like, we'll use the 25th Amendment on Trump. Get him out and say he's crazy. Ha, he's a danger to everyone. He had already, in their weird system, he had already been beaten, supposedly, by that election. Now, many people, understood that there were all kinds of shenanigans in that election on a scale that we have never seen in election history. But they were afraid. They were worried. And they wanted some kind of pretext. So they worked on this. But then after they got Trump out of office, now they're still trying to use it on a president. In this case, their own. So the deep state wants to remove that ability from any one individual and spread it among a committee, which doesn't even necessarily need to be involved with anything that we vote for. And that is the removing of the complete sovereignty of the United States. These are the things that we need to watch out for with this administration and the weakness of that figure. It doesn't so much, when Biden stumbles down plain stairs or something like that, it's not a good opportunity just to criticize Biden. But what have they done? They've placed an individual in the White House who is incapacitated to a degree mentally that will not allow him to function fully as president. It's obvious. He's only been in there 2 months, and he already looked like a deer in the headlights in his first press conference.
When you give up answering a question, you just stop in the middle of your answer. Like whatever, right? It's beyond cringeworthy.
It is.
It is so painful
it's tough to watch. It is.
And then to have the press apologize for him, and it's total mind control. Say
they were like, yeah, his mind wanders, but a lot of older people do.
Right, exactly.
Well, you have to be the president in this case. We've never had a president who was 78. Look, I know older people who could, even in their 90s run this country, but Biden's not one of them. He's had 2 brain operations for aneurysms, as we know. And he was never that sharp to start with.
Touche. Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Okay, I've got a series of them all around the same question. So, G Free Are We says, G Free says, are we in COG? Nothing seems real. Craftomatic says, COG takeover when Biden is ousted. And GDNPB says, could the neocon Clinton faction bring up enough of her past to force Kamala out, and then Biden picks Hillary right before he steps down or is removed?
Yeah, there's so many scenarios there. One thing I would point out to you, of course, there are things with Kamala that could disqualify her as vice president, but they went through all this trouble to make her VP that it's kind of hard to imagine them doing it.
I sent you the picture of her on the cover of the magazine of great women of history, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, she's in the center of it. Just, it's such a PR campaign.
When they gave Obama, that was ridiculous, right? They give him the Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize, before he did anything. He had just gotten office.
And then how many countries did he bomb?
A dozen. A dozen. Obama was quite the bomber. He bombed Libya. He bombed Yemen. We think about him because it wasn't a full-on war like Iraq and Bush. It's supposed to be like, oh, he didn't really, go in there and become this big military type, but he did, especially when he had Hillary Clinton as his Secretary of State. They went in there and wrecked Libya. Libya became a wrecked country as a result of the effort of Clinton and Obama. And it's incredibly unfortunate because, in fact, we had worked, even under the corrupt Bush administration, to bring Libya under the family of nations. And they had given up their chemical and nuclear weapons programs. And so when we turn around and don't keep our word, and we don't, and we support the efforts to oust him, and then he gets, killed live on Libyan TV, those other countries look at us and they say, we see what happened to him when he gave up his weapons, So when you have countries like Iran and the countries we don't like, it's not encouraging the things that Obama did. So Obama was no peacemaker. He was really such a plant by the bankers. And a lot of people don't understand this in relation to Obama. I think that we need to see through these people, on one hand, as the great villains, because they are villains, but we have to see how they're part of a criminal system. So we have to see through them to the people that are pulling the strings and the fears of those people that are pulling those strings, because we have to understand that in order to get a handle on how to get the United States to be free and independent and then lead the world that way. The idea that, we can be locked down, or they can throw the Constitution away, and they can forcibly inject and randomly make it required, these just aren't constitutional aspects, literally. And they bring us into the notion of a fascist state, which we are really getting pushed into fast. And Trump was a problem for a lot of those people working on this, because whatever people think of Trump, he wasn't operating for empire. He wasn't creating that, he wasn't the New World Order guy. He was working for a very different group, which is the America First people. And the America First people were never interested in things that were going on in Afghanistan and the Middle East. They did concern themselves with things like Central America and South America, and they had, programs in relation to that. But they were largely associated with Fortress America, manufacturing here, military here, finances here. And that element is such an affront to the globalist mentality, which just thinks of the different levels of the earth as economic sectors to be run by a banking elite. So Trump was an incredible disruptor for 4 years, and they breathed such a sigh of relief when they were able to oust him under these very suspicious circumstances. However, if you'll notice, the first actions really of 2021 have seen close to the complete ouster of Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York City and the state of New York as governor, because of his incredible, destructive activities. Here's the thing. The real thing that happened with Cuomo, as we know, is that his aide revealed to fellow Democrats in private, although not knowing she was taped, that they had cooked the corona numbers, and that the things that happened in the nursing homes in New York were the result of Cuomo's activities, which is a kind of genocide, moving directly those patients who were ill into a nursing home of the most vulnerable people on the planet. So because that got out, then Cuomo became public enemy number one, when he's been their guy, as Catherine Fitz has told me, who's dealt with him since the 1990s. He's been Mr. Global's guy, the New World Order, or the Deep State's guy, since day one. So for them to turn on him and to have all these different things coming out, all the sex allegations and all these different things, he's out of there. And his future is toast. But why? Think about it. Why are they turning on? That starts to open up a series of questions. However, when we look at it just from the point of view of what happened with the election, the ouster of Trump, then we look at Gavin Newsom's situation. And I'll tell you, Newsom is hanging on by a thread. I mean, really a thread. Pelosi rallies behind Newsom, says it's unnecessary to run another Dem in California recall. They got the 2 million signatures they needed to oust him. That election will take place in October. And Gavin Newsom has said that, if anything, we don't need to go back to normal, because normal was never good enough. We need to keep on with the lockdowns and all this other stuff. He was the poster boy for the real takeover via lockdown. And, it's funny. Somebody mentioned earlier about COG, and I didn't really fully answer it. I'll tell you this about the continuity of government program. They tried to initiate it when Trump got COVID in October, which is why Trump did all the unusual things that he did after the fact of the election, into reshuffling the military, changing out Mark Esper and all the rest of it, because these people had tried to activate the COG commander to take over the United States. That was the level that they were operating on in October. So when someone says, do you think they'd use COG? Hell yeah, I think they'd use COG. But our friend Gavin was the person who stood up at the beginning of the coronavirus and said, I could call martial law if I want to. He was the one who was ringing the bell for martial law. And it was actually his little 4'11" counterpart in LA, Mark Garcetti, the mayor, who tried to issue a law, saying that they were going to shut off people's water who weren't obeying the coronavirus protocols. And he did that. But one of the most crazy things that he did of all was he tried to outlaw walking. So these are the types of fascists that you're dealing with there. So I don't know. I mean, could COG be any worse than those people? It makes you wonder. But the continuity of government group is always looming there because they have the ability through the Patriot Act and the September 11th emergency protocol, which is signed by every president every year to allocate all this money. You have to sign that emergency protocol, which means Northcom can at any point take over the country and that COG would be in control. It's in the emergency measures that we live under. And that was all as a result of Bush and Cheney creating that ridiculous legislation. Now you have the Department of Homeland Security. And the Department of Homeland Security says, we are looking for domestic terrorists the same way that we were looking for Al-Qaeda. And we will track their movements and we'll do all this stuff. Well, they can call anyone who doesn't agree with the administration of domestic terrorists. And in fact, they have. As a matter of fact, John Brennan, he of the CIA Drone King fame under Obama, and who, by the way, was the boss of Lou Elizondo, as James Clapper was also his boss. And Brennan is deep, deep in the UFO file. But what does Brennan have to say? Well, Brennan said, look, we have to take this very seriously, these domestic terrorists. He goes, there's people who want to change the country, like libertarians. Do you remember this? This is 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Libertarians. First of all, you could say libertarians founded this entire country. But libertarians aren't domestic terrorists. You know, libertarians are like Lew Rockwell and Rand Paul, you know, and Ron Paul. I mean, give me a break. So libertarians have been there as a party for a long time. So this whole thing, they just want to get rid of the competition. Now, when they were saying that, and when they were bringing this out, they're saying, look, the Department of Homeland Security, when it started, it had 9,000 employees. You know how many employees it has now? 240,000. That's almost 250,000 people. What on earth is that? What has that got to do with anything? So these bureaucracies, just like the Central Intelligence Agency, grew from this thing that was supposed to go around the world and collect information for the president. They started doing their own ops. And, you know, they called it the Office of Policy Coordination to get it its own title and all this stuff. And those guys would go over there and overthrow elections and blow up trains and all the rest of it, to the point where Kissinger, well, really it was Truman in the beginning, took a look at this situation and said, you have to get that under control. And these weird, you know, people who really, remember, you have to say the CIA was founded not out of a military command, but was founded off Wall Street, because those were all Wall Street lawyers who set it up, including Alan Dulles from S&C. So you've got this weird element running the world, a kind of banker Wall Street element, directly through a government apparatus that went off the rails and created this massive secret economy, massive secret technology, massive secrecy around the UFO file. And so now the big payoff for them is to bring out some type of version of this UFO disclosure. This is what we're looking at coming in to this situation. And with that, Miss Olivia, I'm going to turn it
Really?
over
Questions
to you.
already? Okay. I do want to start by saying Maureen Seberg is in the Ideas Room.
Fantastic.
And she asks, why does Henry Kissinger have more security than US presidents? I was unaware of that, but she kept punching the Kissinger button.
I'll tell you, there's some interesting things there. Maureen's written some really interesting articles recently as well around the UFO issue. So I highly recommend that. But one thing I would say about this and Kissinger is, look, Kissinger's been in the heart of this. Remember that in the late 50s, there's a program where the Rockefellers are bringing everything out, like the problem of race in America, the problem of finances and all the rest. The secret aspect of that was the problem of the UFO file, and they kept those volumes, which were all done under the purview of the research of Henry Kissinger. Now, there's a tremendous book called UFO incident at Aztec. And this is an extraordinary book because it tracks down this doctor's wife, and he was a key person in the UFO file in setting it up and testing these things. And she identified Kissinger as his boss in that program. So Kissinger was deep in the UFO file, just as Nixon was. So later when Nixon chooses him, people are like, why is Nixon choosing this Harvard elitist to be his point man? And he's creating kind of like someone bigger than a Secretary of State. He's creating a position for this guy, National Security Advisor. What's the deal? And it makes sense if you put those pieces together. If you leave out the UFO aspect, history doesn't make sense. This is what we learn over and over again. And there have been a lot of people who've taken a crack at the history aspect around the UFO piece, but they're lacking a deeper understanding of how the deep state aspect works. In other words, if you could take the mind of like Peter Dale Scott, Professor Peter Dale Scott, who's had so much influence on my understanding of politics and has been on the show many times, and he understands and coined the term the deep state, and he's wrote about deep politics, for example. He wrote about deep politics and the death of JFK, cocaine politics, the Contras. You know, he understands the way that the government accounting flows and the different things that they do. If you could take that type of understanding and bring it into the technological and Apotheum aspects of the UFO file, then you could really understand the entire picture. Because what's missing with the UFO researchers is they don't have Professor Scott's understanding of the deep state. It's an incredible blind spot for people who study these things. And somebody who I think had great knowledge and who I had the pleasure of spending a lot of time talking to was Stanton Friedman, who I think understood how secrecy works. But that sweeping secrecy, if you look at Kissinger's career and all these positions that he's been in, Bilderberg, he's still called in to, give advice on these things. And what is he, 100 years old? I mean, it's quite remarkable. So he became such a key player, and the incredible knowledge that he has. But let's not forget that what was revealed on this program, which is that Robert Merritt gave that information to Kissinger on behalf of President Nixon. So he holds the time capsule information, and all the time capsule information was really the key of the energy formula of the UFO file, which is pretty significant. So there is another person that Merritt said had that information, and but basically, that explains a lot, I think, with Kissinger. But it's an excellent question. Go ahead.
I'm trying to find them. I can't actually find them, but there were some questions about Israel and the betrayal of the people there and what is going on. Would you like to address that? It's very edgy.
No question. I did talk about it in the Fitz interviews, which if you subscribe for the newsletter, you can listen to those for free. I mean, it's phenomenal, and it's very strange what they're doing there, because they're really, like in Australia with the lockdowns, they used Australia as the guinea pig for what if we just use straight Nazi tactics? What if we lock these people in their homes and really make it illegal to, walk in a park? We've seen some of that in other places and in the United States. We've seen some heavy draconian measures, but Australia was really the key piece. Now, the after effect of, making sure that everyone takes the injection and is on board with this and with the government response to it and doesn't question anything. They had someone in Israel who was starting a party, who was a doctor, who was going to take on all of this stuff. And it was just an independent political party, and he was jailed as soon as they figured out what he was about and that he was going to get some support. So it is a terrible thing that we're hearing about happening. I'm still trying to get more information on it, but I can tell you this. The Pfizer CEO was supposed to go to Israel, and he hasn't taken his own vaccine yet, because what he said, well, I shouldn't take it because other people deserve to take it first. Doesn't give you a whole lot of confidence in his vaccine somehow. And he's a creep. I'm just going to come out and say it. The guy's a creep. But he was supposed to go to Israel, and interestingly enough, they wouldn't let him in without him taking his own vaccine, and he wouldn't take it. So there's a lot of interesting things going on in relation to this, but they're, again, staging that population in Israel, and it's incredibly disturbing. And we're trying to get more information on it because the media is so heavily blacked out about what's going on. So I'm hoping to learn more about it. Yes.
Truth Flower wants to know, has the JFK executive order revived by Trump concerning the CIA been revoked by executive order? What happened with that?
No. Well, it's interesting. There's a lot of things about the JFK records that are coming into play. First of all, let's not underestimate Stone. Remember when he put out the movie, he created such a firestorm in the 90s that the Assassination Record Review Board was formed, which was a civilian panel which could look over all these records to determine what could be let out. So Stone and his great 4-hour bombshell that's coming out in July may get a lot of this going. October of 2021 is when the Trump administration decided on behalf of the CIA to extend their deadline out to, because they came in the morning of Trump, who was preparing to release the whole thing, and begged him, saying, oh, you're going to give away, important vital things about people that are still alive in the field, which is completely untrue because President Kennedy was assassinated 57 years ago. And any of the agents who were involved, the CIA agents who were involved either in the activity or inactivity around that period of time, would either be dead or long retired. So, and the Soviet Union doesn't even exist as a country anymore. So what exactly are they talking about? Fidel Castro's not there anymore. So none of that stuff holds up. What they're worried about, it's not that in those records is the actual key to the JFK assassination, but the problem is for them, there's enough information to connect the dots for things that they've lied about. And so they can be caught saying, and embarrassed heavily, saying, we lied about all this stuff. And, the thing is that they need, especially with the UFO off, et cetera, they need the public's trust. So the JFK records becomes the incredible crux of the deep state system holding that secret. Because if it were ever outed that the CIA assassinated President Kennedy, which is very obvious to people who research the subject, then the legitimacy of the CIA goes out the window. And you would need incredible reform, which I've suggested from the start. But it's an out-of-control bureaucracy agency, has its own Air Force and has its own control files. And anywhere you look, when you talk about control of society and control of the media looks directly to the Central Intelligence Agency for their talking points. And that element of the deep state that the CIA holds is all connected with Wall Street and connected with the corruption of the American system. And, there are corollaries around the world. If you look at other countries, they have their own levels of corruption like this. In our case, we had a battle on the public covert and overt levels. And what took place was there was a battle, and that the covert side beat over the public side. And so the Kennedys were thrown out and were killed, and the CIA puppets were installed. That's how it went. And, it's funny. I've always noticed this whenever they had those PBS specials and they'd have these liberals come out and they were like, the things that we accomplished, the great things that we accomplished. And there were great things accomplished in the 60s, but they're not admitting there that, basically the CIA took over. And that's that territory has never been reclaimed. So, at times in culture and civilization in the 1970s, we had the ability through the Church Committee to examine the CIA's role in assassinations. And what happened, though, is the CIA power base just grew. And so we're living in a situation where the CIA has so much power now that it's impossible to tell the difference between the government and the CIA, because the CIA manipulates so many things inside of that government. And the CIA is connected so much to that corporate Wall Street element that it is the definition of fascism, which is the merging of corporate and state power. Well, that's what we see taking place. And then you have to ask yourself, how much of that relates to China's infiltration of America, for example? And then when Fitz talks about Mr. Global, and the reason that the Washington Post is mad that Fitz says Mr. Global, is because it gets to a deeper element, which says, look, there's this higher side of the whole pyramid, which everybody is playing for, Democrats, Republicans, or whoever. And it's that structure that they're playing to. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. We're going deep here in the State of the Union, taking your questions. What have you got?
I want to connect these two. So Najat says, I feel like we are living the crescendo of the JFK saga. And Ed Kaufman says, can we make a direct connection between the delay of the JFK FOIA documents and the delay of the Stone JFK documentary? I just want to say, yes. It's our fault. I'm really feeling this. We have been lazy. We have put up with so much. We have settled for crap government. We have settled for lies and obfuscation. And, they had it right in the 60s. You get out there, you protest, and you make it really uncomfortable for them. And that's how we, the people, control the government. And we have just been, they have sedated us with junk food and with cable TV.
Well, now what they want to do is they want to take the people who would form a coalition and protest like that and call them domestic terrorists. So no matter what they do, they can create false flags around them and say like, oh, look, they blew up this building and like, we need to go after them. Meanwhile, they loose, these groups like BLM and Antifa. BLM doesn't even represent the minority community. It's Chinese funded. And, there's a lot of investigations around those organizations. The thing is, and I think what's important, is when we were to create an active protest movement against these things, you could say that the populist rallies, the Trump rallies, are basically a protest against this kind of deep state takeover. What's happening, though, that's very interesting, is they're creating mayhem like they did last summer with all the riots and the looting and all this stuff, so that the idea of rioting or the idea of protesting would become very distasteful. And so that the people who wanted to do something, we saw an incredible pushback in the UK. It was a massive protest. We see massive protests in Germany. The mainstream media will not cover it. In France, the mainstream media will not cover it here because they don't want people to see that, because then they're afraid this side will wake up like those people are waking up. So this is the crisscross. If I understand that there's a movement in the UK and the movement in France and a movement in Germany towards lockdown freedom so that you can't, lock me in my house over this bizarre thing, the bizarre cult that you've made out of a medical situation, then around the world that goes round and round, what they've been trying to do is chop that off, just like the protest movements would get chopped off. So we have to watch the manipulation of that. In my opinion, however, that's failing. That's why you see these governors failing, who are the chief people behind the lockdowns, because fundamentally the lockdowns were intense failures and economically crippled the countries. But they also brought in a fascist element that wants to stay. And the fascist element needs to be booted. There's no question about it.
Heart of Texas, DJ, do you think Texit has any traction?
They're always possible. We've talked, I'll mention Catherine Fitz again, because she said at a certain point they might be approving of civil war on the deep state side because of the missing trillions that have they've stolen from the government. So the idea that they could remove, the idea of the United States and split it up into these different territories, then that central government of the United States, the missing money, they could just keep the money because there's no entity to reclaim it from the people who stole it in the first place. And the story of the missing money has to be kept as a central tenet, so we understand a lot of the motivations. A lot of things are shrouded in secrecy beyond the money also, I would say, though. So the missing trillions gives us some kind of a lens and a window on why they would like to split up the United States, but it doesn't give us the full story. Interestingly enough, I do think that in Idaho and Oregon, they have talked there about merging aspects of those states into a different state. So we do see that could be something that plays out in the future. And in terms of Texas, they've gotten smart lately on this, and they got rid of their mask mandates and things of that nature. So they've been moving in the right direction. Of course, fantastic movement by DeSantis. And I want to, it's important in the middle of all this when we have figures who are emerging, just like when we see people like Newsom dying on the vine, thank God. We also are seeing these great figures rise up. And DeSantis and the things he's doing in Florida, I think, are remarkable because he's saying we're not going to have, I'm just stating it right now, we're not going to have any mandates in relation to these injections. That's not how it rolls in the state, and we'll never do it. Now, I'll tell you, there's a big push to do this. At Rutgers, for example, they want to require the injection for students this fall. That is completely illegal. And Rutgers University has announced that all students planning to attend in-person classes must be fully injected.
I think legally they can't do this because it's not FDA approved. It's just approved for
emergency
use. Because that gets into tricky legal territory.
It's true. No, it's absolutely true.
But they think that people won't question that.
Right. It's just like, hey, you have to go along with it. What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
You're a cop. You have to play the game. What do you mean you won't take it? Saudi Arabia launches health passport for COVID-19 recipients. So this is what they want. They want this passport so that they say you have to be in the system. You have to plug yourself into the system, which we know involves technology. That's why it's an injection and not a vaccine. So these things are very important to understand, and that's why, people like Children's Health Defense and Sherry Tenpenny, these types of people bring us the awareness of what's actually taking place with that. So what we're presented on the media level is, everybody just has to get this. And if we're ever going to get through this together and all this stuff. But in fact, remember, before Corona, before all that, they had this incredible push where they were beating people over the head about measles. And measles is this incredibly kind of non-factor disease. Over and over again, they were saying, oh my God, there's this outbreak of like 5 people with measles. Everybody needs to get vaccinated. So whatever was going on with the pharmaceutical companies in combination with state power, this thing was active in the last decade very heavily, far before the COVID nonsense hit. Interestingly enough, if you go back there and look, there was a big push the year before, and there was a gigantic measure in New Jersey, and RFK Jr. spoke at a big rally about it, and they pushed it back. In states like New Hampshire, they pushed it back. And it was all about mandating students over the objections of their parents and over the religious objections. And this was a territory they had never gone into. So on that pharmaceutical injection side, they were already going into this before they got the big opportunity with the Wuhan lab escapee. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're going to take some more questions here. I'm also going to say something I wanted to finish up in relation to Lou and the UFO aspect. But a couple of quick things here. It was John Ratcliffe, who was the former director of national intelligence, who came out about a week ago and said, look, the UFO file, there are more things to come out. When this stuff comes out in June, it's going to be heavy duty because we haven't revealed a lot of these things before. Ratcliffe served under Trump as director of national intelligence, which means he was giving those reports directly to Trump, which means Trump had all the UFO information that this guy is talking about. And let's not forget that the person who held his seat for him was Grinnell, who was also quite a Trump loyalist. Another quickie here. Former top intelligence official raised expectations on Friday for a forthcoming U.S. government disclosure on what it knows about UFOs. John Ratcliffe, who served as director of national intelligence under former President Donald Trump, was asked on Fox News by host Maria Bartiromo what he knows about unidentified flying objects that have captured people's imaginations for generations. Quote, there are a lot more sightings than have been made public, Ratcliffe said. On the record. Some of those have been declassified, and when we talk about sightings, we're talking about objects that they have seen by the Navy or Air Force pilots or have picked up by satellite imagery that frankly engage in actions that are difficult to explain, movements that are hard to replicate, that we don't have the technology for, or traveling at speeds that exceed the sound barrier without a sonic boom. So that's Apotheum activity in the way that in the lexicon of the way that we describe things here on this program. Quote, when we talk about sightings, the other thing I will tell you is this. It's not just a pilot or a satellite or some intelligence collection, Ratcliffe said. Usually we have multiple sensors that are picking up these things, and some of these are unexplained phenomena, and there's actually quite a few more than have been made public. So a very extensive record inside these intelligence agencies around the UFO file. Ratcliffe, part of the Trump initiative, Space Force, and all the rest, this is the deep level of Trump's knowledge around the UFO file. This is a big behind-the-scenes tug of war between the kind of Biden zombie state communist thing they were trying to push in and Trump's I'm the leader of populism thing. The UFO file was the thing that we didn't understand geopolitically going on behind the scenes between these two forces. Now we're seeing with the report coming out and with the news really picking up on it, now they're really going for it because Trump's not in office and therefore they think he can't get his hands in full on the UFO file. So we'll see. Yes.
Okay, World Change Brief wants to get right down to it.
Yes.
Does DJ predict a fake alien psyop on a public level this year?
I'll tell you, the way that they're positioning themselves is so over the top. I've collected so many reports for this show, and I've been reading them. LA Times, Toronto Star, New York Times, Miami Herald, Boston Globe. Here's one. UFOs harassed U.S. warships off California. That's a big statement. UFOs harassed warship? Mysterious flying objects repeatedly harassed 3 U.S. warships off the coast of California in 2019, at one point matching the speed and bearing of one destroyer for 90 minutes. Now, let's face it, the real UFO aspects in World War II, they would also follow the movements of these planes and even do the same flight formations. So I'm not sure it's harassment is the right word. Mystery drones hovered over Navy destroyers off California. Now they're drones. A minute ago, they were UFOs. Mystery drones? There are tons of programs. How about this? Xprotect operates a program of developing their own UFOs. They test them out in the freak-out level on our own military. We get all these news reports. Then the pilots can come forward and say, I was harassed by this orange light or whatever. That sets up a pretext for it must be a UFO threat. They must be after us. Marco Rubio says, we need money for this. Christopher Mellon and that whole TTSA gang, even though they're dispersed now into the government, they're behind a big push to get what? The UFO threat funding into the actual congressional budget. But what's the next step after that? The next step after that it seems like is the UFO invasion op. And certainly that's a trick in their bag. And we've seen what they did with the coronavirus, which was also predicted heavily. In 2010, the Rockefellers laid out a program themselves about how this would happen. So it's been out there on the record. The UFO aspect, going back to Werner von Braun and his conversations with Dr. Cal Rosen, I mean, he claimed that's the ultimate trump card in their deck. So I absolutely believe it. This year, I think they're putting us into a kind of MK Ultra type state. But that's how I see this year going with it. What do you think?
Najat made a great point. The Monoliths Rock Tour was the starter. That is so
Excellent
astute.
point, yes. Well, also the monoliths were so embraced by the media. Ordinarily, they'd be like, "Oh, this is some crazy cranks on the internet are doing this." They loved it every time. Whenever things go into a lockdown, like in December, they were having those numbers rise, and they were like, "Everyone needs to go into lockdown." By the way, look at all these weird monoliths. Or let's not forget last, March and April, when there was all this big activity and they were saying, "Oh, everyone needs to stay home," and all that. And then suddenly the Pentagon came out with the very same stuff that the New York Times article had in it. It was nothing new. It was like they released the same videos that had already been released, which I already knew had been released in 2007 on YouTube. Not exactly high-ranking special secret stuff. And the Tic Tac is, that video is literally a radar exercise. It's not even real film, as Russell Targ pointed out to me in our interview. And Targ knows a lot about physics, does a lot of physics aerial experiments. And he was like, that thing is not what they said it was at all. So they were able to fool everyone with that. So the problem over and over again is that the media lies about these things, just like they lied about the election, just like they don't have a balanced conversation in relation to the injection fraud, just like they say Bill Gates is a great humanitarian, when in fact he's an incredible, unethical. This is somebody who is masquerading as a doctor and a humanitarian. He's not, he was a very, very sleazy monopolist in the tech field. And I know that because I worked there for so many years and I understood how he was regarded and people who knew him. I mean, he was basically one of the most, sketchy people on the planet. And now he's reinventing himself as, Martin Luther Gates with a vaccine ready for the world. And he wants to make sure that everyone is vaccinated and all the rest. And he wants them to get on a program and updates with that. It's just a sick thing. I mean, all he is somebody who runs a foundation. He's got a lot of money and he's paid off a lot of people and he's part of that deep state. But these are not people who have any titles that should be respected. I mean, at least in the case of an elected official, people on some level are supposed to have elected them. This guy is literally just an opportunist and something a lot worse than that. Yes.
Kontiki Man wants to know, so what will the Biden-Harris administration do with Trump's Space Force?
Well, this is very interesting because whatever Trump did to put the Space Force into action was obviously contrarian to what they want to do because they want to scrap the Space Force. Jen Psaki, the Biden spokeswoman, laughed when the reporter, and even the reporter was like an NBC News guy, hardly like a conservative. And he was like, "Why are you laughing?" Because it's really weird to laugh at. It's like if somebody brings up the Air Force and you laugh at it. It's an actual armed services corps that people join now, which is part of the United States armed services. So the idea of laughing at it is really quite remarkable. But there have been editorials from the Washington Post and others saying we really need to scrap the Space Force. And my guess is that it's because it's honeycombed with the Trump loyalists and that Trump put his stamp on the Space Force and they can't get their op stuff going with those people in there unless they fire them all. So I think that they're thinking of scrapping the Space Force on the Biden side and trying some other thing, doing like the moonshot program. They have the Artemis program, right? The first woman on the moon and stuff. They're trying to take the weird things that they've done with the black budget and the secret space program in the last 50 years and cover it under the idea of inclusiveness and we love women and all this stuff. But those people don't. First of all, I can tell you that the groups that operate around Davos and in that deeper level, they don't have the best in mind for humanity. And the idea that they would be very enlightened around race and gender issues, they just see them as things to manipulate and divide people with. And we have to remember that, unfortunately, over and over again, you get people walking around and they're not empowered. They're acting entitled because the media is giving them the right to judge other people. It's like you have carte blanche. They're actually tempting them to judge other people. So it's kind of a reverse situation. And whenever we get into this, we always wonder, why is the media misinforming all these people? And then you go behind the scenes and you see the Gates Foundation funding the media. You see Pfizer sponsoring Anderson Cooper. I mean, it's very obvious. Those people are shills, and their last hope. I mean, that's too bad that it got to this, because I think we could go forward with a civilization with people existing, who have contrary apparent opinions about things. But what we've arrived at is the people on the Davos side are saying this way or no way, because if they can't have the kind of leadership that they want, then you're out, But the thing is, they've taken on the task of controlling almost 8 billion people that way. Yes.
The problem is there are no checks and balances in our society anymore.
Yes.
And I mean, I truly believe that in order to fix anything, you need a proper diagnosis of the problem.
Yes.
Right? This is why Catherine says, the big question is, who is Mr. Global?
Yes.
Right? And it's very difficult to diagnose the problem without knowing that. Who are we dealing with? Why are they behaving the way that they're behaving? But on the ground, we certainly can't trust the media anymore. Who is advocating for humanity?
Excellent point. Well, we have some heroes in the midst
who are getting silenced.
Who are
strategically
continuing to get silenced. I think you're going to see more of that clash this year. And, it's great that we have Gigi Young out there, because one of the things that she's done some amazing videos on is the kind of fork in the road, and how you're going to see a split level where there are going to be people in the official reality going along and thinking everything's hunky-dory. And then there's going to be another group that has split off. And that those people, in the words of Catherine Austin Fitts, are going to be preparing to, pick up the pieces after the Mr. Global crowd fails. Because when they fail, if you've ever seen those post-wartime videos of Berlin after World War II, and John F. Kennedy has an essay about it, when he was taken over there by James Forrestal, who was the defense secretary, he was led among these ruins, and he just had this kind of shocking, realization looking at it all. Just was incredible bombings that took place in order to defeat the Nazi regime, but the whole place was leveled. It was just all rubble. So that's the extent to which these people will go. I have no doubt about it. Of course, I have better visions for humanity than the types of things that these people have been doing, and I hope it doesn't come to that. But I think that this becomes the key realization, because I see people with deep insight reaching this, that there's going to be two levels of society, and one level is moving toward a sustainable, real future, and these other people are moving towards treating humanity like cattle. And the groups that are moving towards treating humanity like cattle and harvesting them as a commodity, this is their plan. This is the plan that they have set. This is the plan they want to do. And it's like Ray Kurzweil, the transhumanist, said in relation to him merging with machines. You know, he said, nobody can stop me. I'm going to merge with the machine. And, you know, this is their attitude, which is they're going to become part of this machine and humanity is going to be these secondary slaves. That's where they're going with their thinking. So it is a very naked aggression towards humanity at this point, but I think there are great opportunities to see through it. And it's kind of like the David and Goliath story in many ways. There's that aspect there, the vulnerability of the giant, that has to be kept in mind. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, the X State of the Union. We're going deep here on this. And, you know, we got through X100, Ghislaine in the Hot Zone, which was a really well-received episode. And there's a lot of deep information in that. We have 2 parts of that coming, X100 Part 2 and 3. We're going to have those coming up for you. I mentioned that we did these crucial Catherine Austin Fitts interviews, but we did it off the platform of YouTube, and we ran them in our newsletter. So if you sign up for our free newsletter at darkjournalist.com, you'll get access to those very powerful, you know, they're more than interviews. They're really an overview of the steps that civilization is moving towards and steps we can take to counteract some of the insanity that we're seeing from the leadership. So I highly recommend them. And there's actually a 3rd installment that will be coming out as well.
This weekend, right?
For our subscribers. Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Ronin returns. Is the next step for Mr. Global collapsing the global economy and setting up a one world government and technocracy, total control and surveillance? And I'm going to add, and how does this possibly fit in with a UFO psyop?
Well, it is a really interesting question. You know, somebody left a comment on the last episode we did, and they said, will we all starve? I thought this is a really good question, just like this question is a good question. What we're seeing is basic things that we expect there to be for us being questioned. So the group inside of Davos, Klaus Schwab, you know, this ilk of person. Remember, they put those people forward, but actually behind them is the actual group. The people they have out there in front are, you know, they aren't really who we're dealing with, but just to play along. So somebody like Schwab has a big initiative which says, by 2030, you own nothing and you feel better than you ever have. Why do they want people to own nothing, but have, you know, you feel good because you own nothing? It's not because of, you know, they like John Lennon's song Imagine or something about a utopian world. It's because they plan to take all possession of private property. This is their vision. And they want you to be plugged in to their system so they can harvest your talents, your assets, your family, and all the rest, because they've reached the diabolical level of power. And they now feel with the technology that they can achieve this. And they've made tremendous strides in a short period of time, really, about 25 years with the technology. Many people have examined the period of 2016 itself and said, right there is when things went into this incredible tailspin. And all these things on the transhumanist side were getting pushed. This whole thing about, you know, 8-year-olds changing their gender and this type of stuff just got rolled out hard, just as the populists got a president in that spoke to their purposes and their vision and their needs. And again, there were 2 versions of populism very active in the 2016 election, and neither of them were Clinton or Rubio. It was Trump versus the Sanders people. The Sanders people are a type of populism. The Trump people are, you know, a type of populism. So when we're looking at that, the populism blew out the leadership's response. And they spent 4 years, including bogus investigations, ridiculous conspiracy theories, Russian conspiracies, impeachment, Ukrainian conspiracies, and all the rest. This is what they were engaged in. And they had to slow down whatever those populists were up to. Now, whatever you think of Trump and how much he got accomplished, he kept the central idea of the United States as a central tenet of his presidency. So therefore, this aspect becomes the crucial piece, which is the United States and the Constitution upon which it was founded is a great counteractive activity. It's the great counteraction to the globalism of the Davos crowd, of the Bilderberg crowd, and the massive controllers and the control grid that they're trying to install via the space fence and other things. So it's the populism that they're targeting. That's why they're after the domestic terrorism bill, because they want to strip away the ability for people to be concerned about a international conglomerate coming in and taking over their country. And so this is where we've arrived. And I do feel like there are answers in relation to the ballot box on this. I think it's a major piece, but it's more about the consciousness of the people involved publicly, not going along with, your kid, your child being forced to take injections in order to go to school. It's absurd. So people everywhere, I think, need to stand up against that. But that's just one example. But it's a good example. Yes.
Just what Najat said this wonderful thing. She's on fire tonight, and
that's great.
I just wanted to share it. She said, Americans need to admit there's an invisible, unelected government. And that's sort of, it's step one, right?
I actually think that they would.
A lot of them are coming to that conclusion.
I want to point this out. Governor Ron DeSantis opposes vaccine passports in Florida. That's important because on the state level, there are 12 states that are engaged in legislation saying you can't mandate this injection. That needs to be all 50. In sharp contrast with New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who recently imposed vaccine passport requirements for people in New York to attend certain events, DeSantis is deciding to stand up for freedom and against the imposing of vaccine passports in Florida. In a Thursday press conference, DeSantis stated his firm opposition to vaccine passports, as well as to requiring people to demonstrate they have tested negative for coronavirus. Yeah, especially since those tests are so off the map. A WCJB TV report quotes DeSantis' comments on the matter from the press conference. Quote, I just want to make it very clear, in Florida, we are not doing any vaccine passports. Governor DeSantis said during the news conference. However, if you go to the UK announces vaccine certificates, says they're not vaccine passports, they're certificates. And you can actually go to the gym and go to the bar if you just show your certificate. So this is where they're moving this. But you can see on the state side the growing resistance to that because they know where this is going as well. And this is where the great clash is that we're going to see unroll in 2021. And I have no doubt that if this turns into a large-scale protest movement on the side of getting rid of these internationalists interfering in the activities of the United States, they're going to set off a George Floyd type situation to try to get us back in that thing about, oh, they're burning down cities, guess we can't have other protests for other things. So, we're going to have to be smarter about it, I guess, than we were last year and figure out how to advance those things regardless of what they try to do. Yes.
Yeah, actually, we really do need to do that. So you have to have an agreement with everybody who is going to practice civil disobedience. It has to be the kind that MLK subscribed to and taught people how to do it so you don't fight. You go limp. You override your own impulse to fight someone who is attacking you. It has to be peaceful so that they cannot point the finger at you.
Well, this is an energetic principle also. if you talk to someone who's really into martial arts, they would show you that as well, which is you can use your opponent's psychotic energy to try to get you against them. And I think that that's really crucial. What's even really more important, I think, consideration-wise, is that what America is. America has always believed in free speech. It's founded on free speech. As a matter of fact, the media, the ability to have a real media, is enshrined in the Constitution. So they understood how essential it was. The ability, free speech, the ability to defend yourself, the ability not to have search and seizure, all these types of things. These are the things they're trying to take away with the Department of Homeland Security. Homeland is what Nazi Germany called the country, because that's the mentality that we're talking about. So it's going to take that type of resistance. The governor and the state level and the things that we're seeing on that side with the legislatures, it might come down to a state by state freedom state versus, lockdown tyranny states. And that may very well be what we're looking at the development of in 2021. We'll see how far they want to take it.
ShadowNet says protesters in Bristol tonight placed flowers on the police. This is what I'm talking about. You need, and maybe everybody needs to wear something like I know it's cheesy, but like a big peace sign on their t-shirt or something like that. So it reinforces it. And it's just, this is what we stand for. It has to, unfortunately, branding works, right? So there have to be proper hashtags and logos, the whole thing. And that's what a movement is. Slogans, the whole thing. It has to be well organized.
It's pretty interesting because I think you're going to see it's happening organically in the UK, where the police just can't stop them. And they're so big. And so what happens is, in the middle of a peaceful protest, like we saw in Germany, they introduce provocateurs. In other words, they slide people in who seem to be dressed and are like the protesters, very much like the deep event of January 6th that we saw with the Trump rally and speech, and then all the Capitol events, and them stripping all of the police around there to try to trap the followers going into the Capitol. That whole thing, that's MLK. If you go back to his peaceful protests, he was constantly harangued by provocateurs that the FBI would hire. And eventually we found out that some of the people who were close in on the MLK circle were hired by the FBI to keep an eye on them, watch them, hire the provocateurs to make it look like this guy who wanted to peacefully raise the civil rights aspect was actually creating violent riots in these cities. So we have to keep our eye on that as we develop these types of resistance. But I'll tell you this, people, I don't think we have seen the strength of Middle America on this yet. And Middle America has a way of, shocking the house. So I think Middle America, we're going to see a lot more standing up, even if we're seeing a lot of confusion on the ground right now. Yes, Miss Olivia.
David Tormina. DJ, it seems to me that the deep state is so afraid of the public consciousness affecting the planet through some form of X technology, they themselves use insane tactics to ensure that never happens.
Oh, that's really true. We've seen it where built into the patents of things like HARP were the idea that we could send out a frequency to disorient the entire population. So that's what they have wanted to do. Whether they got to the point of doing it, I would say that they have. But certainly it's in the government patents themselves. Just ask Nick Begich, for example, who pointed this out. But I think it's a really excellent point. It reminds me, there was a series, I always count things, it's like a series of actions that lead us to a different level or step. And if you look through history, you can find different things like the Reichstag fire that let the Nazis run rampant over the country. But one of the weird things that came up was when Twitter censored the New York Post, because it was the oldest newspaper in the country, and Twitter was representing this Davos crowd and doing it, and they were willing to take all the flack and all the heat for the rewards that the the pet treats that the Davos crowd would give them. So let's just walk through this for a moment, because I had this ready. This was the original New York Post cover about Facebook and Twitter blocking the New York Post expose on the Hunter Biden laptop, which was incredibly dicey and revealed criminal activity. Dorsey, a couple of days ago, getting grilled by Congress, says blocking post-Hunter Biden story was a total mistake, but he won't say who made the mistake inside of Twitter. That came out yesterday. By the way, I think Dorsey looks mentally unhinged, and I think he's very easy to manipulate by this crowd because he doesn't seem to be playing with a full deck. That's just my personal, uneducated examination of him psychologically. All right, now let's jump right to this story, keeping that censorship in mind. Remember, shortly after that, they censored President Trump from Twitter, which was also extraordinary and was denounced by Bernie Sanders and Angela Merkel. Think about that. No fans of Trump. New York Post story. The Secret Service allegedly intervened in a baffling 2018 incident involving Hunter Biden and a gun. This is a really weird story, but it may get at some aspects of what we're looking at here with a criminal activity covering up other criminal activity. Secret Service intervened in an investigation in a 2018 incident involving Hunter Biden and his girlfriend at the time, his former sister-in-law, Hallie. His former sister-in-law, in which she took his gun and tossed it into the trash, thinking he was going to kill himself with it, according to a report. When she returned to retrieve the gun, it was gone, Politico reported on Thursday. Police in Delaware launched an investigation in case the gun left in a trash can across from a high school had been used in a crime, the report said. But Secret Service agents contacted the owner of the store where Hunter bought the gun and asked to take the paperwork regarding the sale. The owner, Ron Palmieri, at first balked at the request, suspecting they were attempting to hide Hunter's ownership of the gun, but ultimately complied and turned over the documents to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, the government agency that oversees federal gun laws. The Secret Service said it had no record of agents investigating the incident and said President Biden wasn't even under protection at that time. Then, several days later, the gun was returned by a man who searches trash cans for recyclables. It raises the question, was Hunter Biden involved in a crime with a gun? Was this an attempt to get rid of it? Was this the real Secret Service covering for Hunter Biden? Or was this an outfit pretending to be the Secret Service trying to gain possession of this gun? There's something very, very strange about this story. But remember, the people who are running the story are the New York Post. Did they have this information? Is that why Twitter was grabbing them back in October and silencing them, thinking they know about the gun story? So there's some things there that aren't obvious, but I think that this Hunter Biden aspect could very well remove the current occupant of the presidency and elevate Kamala Harris. But something about that even doesn't feel so steady. Last thing on this, there were no charges filed or arrests made in the incident. The role of the Secret Service remains unclear. This is really bizarre, because I can tell you with the Secret Service, you know, if a judge asks the Secret Service, do you have it? You know, do you have a record of this? Have you done it? They have to produce that ultimately. So they're really going to great lengths to protect somebody here. Politico got a copy of the transaction and a receipt of the October 12th purchase of the gun. Hunter answered no to the question of the transaction, asking, are you an unlawful user or addicted to marijuana or any depressant, stimulant, narcotic drug, or any other controlled substance. Hunter had been discharged from the Navy 5 years earlier after testing positive for cocaine, and he and his Biden family members have been open about his history of drug abuse. Lying on the form is a felony. So if he lied about the drug thing to get the gun in the first place to kill somebody else or himself, it's a felony. At the time, Hunter was divorced from his first wife, Kathleen, and involved in a romantic relationship with Hallie, the widow of his dead brother. So there are other weird things there about his belligerent activity when the police showed up, barking at them and, really giving them a hard time, and also saying that the people at the gun shop were lying about him getting the gun and how they were illegals and all the rest. So very erratic behavior. I can tell you, call it my news sense. Something in that story relates to what they did back in October, and that whole thing I think is going to come out. Yes, Mrs.
Robin Mead says Hunter is a felony.
Somebody, this is some real criminal stuff on display, and we knew his Burisma stuff that was already very, very sketchy. But this even goes up a notch.
So what did Nixon say about the cover-up? About the crime and the cover-up?
It's not the crime that gets you, it's the cover-up. No truer words were spoken.
He's a man who should know.
I'm telling you, Nixon at this point looks like a choir boy compared to these people. I mean, this is... And if he was going for UFO disclosure, he was under attack from all sides. And I can tell you, in looking at Watergate deeply with some of the people who were involved in it, that it was definitely the CIA deep state aspect that decided to remove Nixon. And that although, there were things that Nixon were doing that were unsavory, unfortunately, all presidents do that stuff. And all presidents have their own enemies list. That's just a fact. Some presidents, like Clinton, have a death list. Let's not forget. Yes.
Lori Collins was asking, Biden is in overdrive to provoke Russia. What do you make of that?
Yeah, this is absolutely fascinating. First of all, we're in the state of Russia having recalled its ambassador, okay? Russia hasn't recalled its ambassador since 1983. So this is a very, very bizarre situation. They haven't recalled it on this level since the Cuban Missile Crisis. So what happened was that Biden called Putin a killer and said that I've talked to him before and told him I thought he had no soul. This is just not the way you deal with other elected officials over other countries that you want to do things with. And also, if you're going to call somebody a killer, then, it opens up a lot of can of worms. So the Putin administration asked them for an apology, which they didn't give, and then all of this stuff started. And then also President Biden announced that they were going to do all types of tech warfare against Russia for supposedly attempting to interfere in the election. Remember that wonderful meme? They've wanted for a while to close down the progress that the Russians are making on their own because they're staying outside to a large degree of this Davos world government activity. They've created their own financial processing system. They're on the verge of having done their own farming and gotten rid of all the GMOs. They've disallowed GMOs. They created their own Sputnik vaccine. I mean, they're not under the control of the global powers, and also they're supporting the regime in Syria that was such a linchpin for the deep state to take over and then move one step closer to taking Iran. So it's a very complex process. It's incredibly dangerous what Biden is doing in relation to Russia and Putin, calling him a killer and doing these cyber attacks against Russia, supposedly in retaliation. By the way, the people who are giving him this information, saying that Russia was involved in trying to manipulate the election, are the CIA. So there's the CIA again, setting off incidents. CIA has been after Russia since the 1940s. I mean, so it's very un-American leadership on this, and I think it's outrageous and extremely dangerous, and I think it needs to be condemned in both houses of Congress as an approach. But of course, there are a lot of people who love let's squeeze Russia because it pleases the globalist masters. And Russia has its problems, there's no question about that, but we don't have the ability after our staged election to call them out for anything because unfortunately, we just, on the international scene, everybody knows that Trump won the election. And so they know that America got taken by the hook there. So we don't have the moral authority that we need to get back. And this was a big key thing, I think, that Reagan understood, which is we need to have the ability to stand up to a foe, but you can't do it without having the moral authority set in, which is why the Iraq War and things like that have damaged us so much internationally. And the fact that Trump was in there for 4 years and didn't fire a shot is important because he didn't start any new foreign wars, and he did draw down troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it might make a liberal shake their head and be like, how is it that, you know, Biden bombed Syria within 30 days of getting in office, but Trump managed in 4 years not to get into a war with them? It's kind of impressive, let's face it, especially after all that rhetoric. Yes.
I don't know if this is supposed to be sarcastic. I'm going to read it. David Thomas says, DJ must work for Biden. That's how he isn't censored.
Look, it's incredible. It's weird about censorship. But, you know, the fact is that I started doing these reports with the idea that I was going to do things independently and not rely on, because I'd already done work for these types of entities that control things, and I didn't want to do that. So all I'm doing is I'm going to continue to do the work that I do independently. And the networks, you know, Yahoo and YouTube and the rest of them, it's going to be up to them, you know, what they do. But I'm, you know, if I have to broadcast off the iPhone, as I've often said, then I'll do it.
He admits it was a joke.
Of course.
Okay.
I just mean, from my point of view, on the censorship side, you know, if they can censor Catherine Austin Fitts, RFK Jr. off Instagram, President Trump off Twitter, then they certainly can censor the dark journalists.
So Marco Zerpa wants to know, and this is the question on everybody's mind, what are the chances that Trump comes back? What is he up to?
No, he's doing a lot, actually. He started a super PAC. He has identified the real rhinos in the Republican Party, who are basically Democrats in Republican clothing, and he has set up primary challenges for them. And, you know, like, that's not just a revenge. I mean, maybe some of it is revenge, but I think that it's also, he realizes if he were to come back, he would have to have that apparatus, that infrastructure in place. I think he's going to be an amazingly powerful force politically going forward. The populists in America far outweigh the liberal activist media and far outnumber. And the only way that the deep state can keep the game going is by faking the numbers. So, you know, Trump, I think at times he shot himself in the foot because he tried to go along with this establishment at times, particularly when it came to the advent of the coronavirus. I think they had shocked everyone internationally so much with it, and that I think he regretted going along with the lockdowns in the beginning. Eventually, he was all for opening things up and did reverse himself and did, you know, he moved on this. So, you know, I'm not saying that Trump is perfect by a long shot, but I would say in terms of that populism aspect, that's there and it's large scale, and he was a lightning rod for, you know, developing that populist movement into a coherent single group. And they're bigger than ever, actually. I see that the real populists in America far outnumber their critics. which is why the domestic terror bill is hot on the minds of the people who want to silence them. Yes.
So Najat said that it's not Trump, it's Sidney Powell. She's pushing for another election in November. I did not know that. I love that idea.
Oh, yeah.
It's a fantastic idea.
She's pushing for another election this November?
I guess so.
Well, I'll tell you, it was not very well understood that Sidney Powell presented very deep evidence against Dominion voting systems. And Dominion tried to sue her for $1.3 billion. They go around doing this.
Billion?
Billion.
Whoa.
Now they're trying to sue Fox News. And they're trying to sue. Fox didn't even do anything against them, right? Because Fox was incredibly lame. The idea that Fox is the counterpoint. Fox is just like, you know, a very watered down version of anything. They weren't even pro-Trump, and you know, so it's not even that kind of a fight. However, Dominion was under such attack, and people have started to question them so much. But the deep state relies on Dominion because they've overthrown elections in other countries. So certainly they need it here for when they, so that this never happens again, because heaven forbid a populist, a real hardcore populist, gets in. And if it's anything like the Trump experience for them, they're toast. Trump himself or a Trump-selected populist could come back with all that money, with all that reach, and they could be right back in the same situation in 2024. So what do they want to do in the meantime? Well, we do see some of the ops they're developing. One of them for sure is the UFO op. So, you know, how does this affect us going forward? It's a really good question, but it's basically a war on populism, which means it's a war on us. So wherever populists and independent voters and people who don't want lockdowns and things of this nature, those people need to get together and just affirm the Constitution of the United States. Every official in the United States swears on the Constitution. The Constitution is the linchpin for putting the system back right. There's no question about it. Yes.
So I really want to ask this question. So the Horned Moon wants to know, why does DJ complain about vaccines when he supports Trump, who is pro-vaccines? But that is just one of many questions around this topic. What is up with Trump and his being pro-vax?
Well, there's so many things about vaccines. First of all, the idea that you can go from 6 required vaccines in 1990 to 76 required vaccines in 2021 suggests that there's been a pharmaceutical takeover of the government apparatus. So it's not, you don't have to be anti-vaccine. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not anti-vaccine. He's anti-excessive, dangerous vaccines hoisted on the public and mandated on the public. So anyone who has a brain is going to take that position, because if you just want to be a guinea pig for a pharmaceutical company, then you've just advocated your own citizenship. It's up to you. But going forward in looking at this, somebody like Trump politically was put into the position of saying, what's the solution? We created the problem. We loosed this thing out of the Wuhan lab. What are you going to do? So now, last year, if I had suggested, or this year, if I had suggested that the CDC, that this virus had come out of the Chinese lab, then I would be a disinformation agent, and all of these different platforms would have taken me off, right? And I have suggested it, but that ties in with this. Former CDC director says he believes coronavirus escaped from Wuhan lab. That's the CDC director.
When is that from?
Yesterday. So, former CDC director Robert Redfield says he believes the coronavirus escaped from a Wuhan lab, a stunning assessment. In an interview with CNN's Sanjay Gupta, Redfield made clear he was expressing his opinion that the coronavirus, which erupted into a global pandemic in 2020, first spread from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, an entire category of people and truth tellers had suggested the exact same thing, including this program. Now the CDC director is saying it on CNN. So you see how this works. Eventually, the facts come out. And then, you know, at one point you're saying, oh, this person is anti this or anti that, or they have a conspiracy theory or whatever. No, they're just people who follow facts on the ground. And then it becomes the object of the person who is just blindly accepting things from the media to say to themselves, when did I become a non-person? When did I abdicate my ability to question authority? This is the essential thing. If you're going to be a citizen, an individual, somebody who could be respected, then you're going to question things that are given to you by people who've been known to lie, including the government and the pharmaceutical companies. It's pretty simple. Any good journalist would do it. I don't know why it's so rare. So in that sense, I think that I'm just doing my job, and we just need more people to do their job.
So why are they doing now? Why are they coming out with this information? Is it because of vaccine hesitancy? And so they actually need to make the virus seem scarier?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. Although I will say this, that it could also be that the CDC director wants to go on the record because he knows it's going to come out, and he doesn't want to make it look like all that time he thought that it was, you know, the official story. He's going on the record now saying, I know that this thing came from the Wuhan lab. The idea is, if you believe the bad story, it's idiotic. It doesn't make any sense. There's no proof for it. And if you know the story behind Charles Lieber and the fact that he was selling secrets to the Chinese, who was a major Harvard scientist, and if you go through the deeper levels of these professors, it's a very, very different story when you look at it. Because what happens is you start to see, oh, China's been invading American brain trust looking for weapons, biological weapons to use against the United States. Were they planning to use this weapon against us? It's quite possible. But it's also possible that it escaped their lab. It is possible. So now we see the CDC
Well, except
director.
for Event 201.
Yes, well, they knew it was coming.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're going to take 2 more questions on this incredible State of the Union night. And, you know, it's interesting, Miss Olivia, when we look at this, it's fascinating to think about the coronavirus and all the things that they've been able to impose on one hand. And then what I'm suggesting is, with the incredible flood of media attention, the next thing that they're planning to impose, like I said, if you thought the coronavirus op was something, wait till you see the UFO threat op in full bloom with government support and all the rest. They'll have their own UFOs. They don't even need the real thing. And as we know, real UFOs haven't invaded, and they're not going to invade because they had the opportunity for hundreds of thousands of years to invade, and they haven't. So the idea of regarding them as a threat, I think, is incredibly off base. The other thing is, you know, we are bringing a very warlike tendency into space. So the idea that there'd be a lot of UFOs checking us out at this point in history makes sense to me, especially after they saw us, you know, dumping the atomic bomb on each other. So, you know, I think we need a deeper insight coming more from the school of thought of, like, the John Mack school of thought in relation to UFOs. We've lost elder statesmen on UFOs. You have a bunch of people who want to be on TV and sell stuff, and it needs to be a totally new field, and the organizations that support it need to get deeper with research, and they need to make a pledge not to cooperate with the Central Intelligence Agency in relation to promoting their figures and false stories, that there's going to be a real disclosure line about actual UFO disclosure, which has so much to do with people, their experiences, and the things that they've gone through. Those are actually the really important pieces for me. The idea of a government giving us a version of UFO disclosure. It doesn't interest me at all, because that version is going to be tilted toward the type of disclosure they want us to accept. It's obvious. I mean, this has to be a crucial thing. And we have really incredible citizen research, independent research on the UFO file.
Dedicated.
Yes, for years.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that stuff's gone on since the 50s. And I think there is a way to bring that. If the public has it, then the government has to respond anyway. The idea of the government giving it to us, it's just like, do you accept that the Wuhan virus came from a bat? That's the official story. Do you really believe that story? They've been able to do global fascism as a result. Do you still think that that's true? I mean, as their stories fall apart, remember WMD in Iraq? Well, WMD in Iraq was the whole rationalization for taking over Iraq. Wasn't there, though, was it? Remember, they tied Iraq to 9/11, but there was no connection. I mean, how much stuff are we going to believe on the public level? Let's think about that.
Well, we have to make character matter again.
Yes.
And
yes.
I mean, it's amazing how these vaccine manufacturers, these pharmaceutical companies who are known criminals, are now whitewashing all of that with, they're saving humanity, right? They're criminals, they're liars for money, right? And, you have to be able to say, like, haters are going to hate, killers are going to kill. You have to know, again, like diagnosing properly, you have to identify properly the animal you're dealing with. The people in media, the people in government, these are not good people. These are not people you would trust your children with for 5 minutes behind closed doors. At some point, I think we have to sort of wake up and say, why have we given all this power to these people who are reprehensible? I'd rather clean out Washington and throw a bunch of dentists and soccer moms in to do their jobs, right? People who actually care about their families, about the earth, about future generations.
No question, absolutely. I mean, they're not only unethical, but they're marketeers, which means, the ends always justify the means, and they want to turn a profit, but it's deeper. Like, you can always abuse and use to your advantage people who want to turn a profit, because you can use their greediness against them. And, what's happening on the deeper level is that much deeper side to things is that they're trying to enslave the entire globe. And they're using the space technology that they borrowed from us and our tax dollars and built for 50 years behind the scenes, while they weren't going to the moon and weren't, they were sending out like little probes to Mars and stuff like that. They're using that infrastructure, the space infrastructure, to do it. And they're using the rules of secrecy around continuity of government to create that space infrastructure safety. So now what they need in order to, kind of parade this stuff is a UFO threat, so they can say, that's why we have all this infrastructure. So the UFO threat is very dangerous, and actually really good UFO researchers should come forward and blow away the kind of Marco Rubio type stuff instead of embracing it. And they should have blown away TTSA. It's too late for that. TTSA blew away itself. But there were some of us who identified what those people were up to. I feel like it's important that if those people who research around the UFO field are going to be self-respecting again, that they need to call these types of things out. They can be a very powerful force by knowing about, the deeper impact of humanity's interaction with another race, with an off-world civilization. That could be a very powerful level of information without kissing up to a weird government disclosure thing. And this is what's interesting to me, because when you really get into assassination research, for example, and the people who research that on the deep state side, they're not sellouts, and so by and large, so I think it's important to find that integrity, because you find a group that's committed to finding answers around something instead of a group that is hot to be in a TV show or something, so it's very important, I think, for us to settle those out. Okay, Miss Olivia, 2 more questions.
Griffin Eagle 7. DJ, will they link any future UFO threat with an unknown virus?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what's interesting, and the TTSA leads the way on this one. If you go through the different bios for the To the Stars group, over and over again, they had medical credentials. And even people like Elizondo had patented his own diseases, from his own scientific researches. All of them, or the vast majority of them, not only did they have all this time with the CIA, but they also had this incredible background that was in medicine. And so on the scientific side of the medical spectrum. So that made me really wonder. But besides from them, I actually feel that there's no question that the threat op could also carry with it, we've taken back some microbes from this UFO that was captured, and it's let loose this disease. They could pull Corona 2, Corona 3, Corona 4. They love variants, right? They've already loved, hey, we're to a second surge. No, it's going to be a third one. I mean, that's what they live on. And, they probably keep rolling Fauci out too. And, People Magazine would say, like, he's the sexiest man alive. Check him out. He's battling the alien virus. That's just the level of insanity that they live on. So that's why when people like Gigi Young talk about that bifurcation split taking place with people who really want to do things like develop responsible ecology, farms, access to water, good community, and really build a society, then you have this other thing which is on overdrive and is eating itself and is, if when we talk about the 8th sphere on this program, it's getting very dense with 8th sphere style energy. So it's one heck of a place to be in. Okay, one more question.
Okay, so this is from a cult fan.
Yeah.
Okay, can you please ask DJ about actual spiritual allies and interdimensional allies which we can use to help us? This is a question for Gigi, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, it's interesting, and I always recommend the work of Gigi Young in this program because it's a great education on so many different things that she looks into. But what was fascinating that I found out was that Catherine Fitz has become a very big fan of Gigi Young and said that at the end of our last program together. And it makes sense to me. And she said, it's interesting to me that after all these years of studying things, I've come to the same conclusion spiritually that Gigi Young has. So this is really great. But what I would say is that type of support is there and available. And of course, the change that takes place within us is always more important and powerful than the change that we project onto the system. Or, we have corrupt figures like Pelosi, who came forward this week and said, it doesn't matter who really won the congressional seat in Iowa. The House Speaker gets to decide who sits in the House. And so she, after complaining about this whole thing with Trump saying that the election was rigged, now she's saying, oh, well, this was rigged against my own, sort of hand-picked person in Iowa. So therefore, since it was a close election, I'm just going to select that person and put them in the House. We have sick people in the leadership and in corporate leadership, and we hear about this all the time. So, we're surrounded in our different endeavors with a lot of corruption, and there is a spiritual counterbalance. So I often refer people to the incredible work of the mystery schools because I think there's a great connection there with our spiritual heritage, and it goes a lot deeper than just somebody than saying, well, be religious or something, and being religious is great, fantastic, but discovering your spirituality is pretty individual type of experience. And this show has been so geared around the State of the Union, kind of ex-State of the Union, and the weird things that are going on. But although these are difficult and challenging things that we're talking about, it's never to be taken as a pessimistic thing. It is more that we've reached a kind of crossroads. And, I always remember the Winston Churchill thing when they're starting to beat back Hitler just a little tiny bit. And he said, this is not the end nor the beginning of the end, but it might be the end of the beginning. And I believe that we're in that kind of a stage. I'd say we've seen it now. We're no longer shocked by the things like the corona lockdown and the fascist tactics that they'll use. We're in the end of the beginning. We've seen the beginning now. We're moving into a different phase, and there's going to be a lot of victories associated with this. And it will be challenging, but, it will give us that sort of feeling to stick together and work on these things. And if we have great minds like we do in the ideas room, I think we'll get pretty far. Everyone, fantastic show.
Let me throw one wild card out at you. I say this one. So Truth Flower wants to know, California will be underwater. Does Elon Musk believe in Casey? And is that why he is moving Tesla to Texas?
I wouldn't be surprised. He has a lot of steganography, deep. But there's something kind of cynical about some of the things that somebody like Musk does. So, and I feel like the people who have benefited so much, like Zuckerberg and Gates and Musk during the pandemic, and Bezos, really, should, and this might sound pretty socialist of me, but really should surrender all those profits that they made, because they made it off of the suffering of other people. So, I'd feel better about people of that ilk if they were doing more genuine work for charity and not just moving around grants to their friends. But yeah, Musk probably has a lot of very deep information. And the fact that he is drilling deep underground in Las Vegas with a boring company, I think he's become the new Howard Hughes in many ways, which means he has to watch out for himself. Everyone, thank you so much. And by the way, I do believe that there may be inundations in California as related. Those things have been shown, I think, to different psychics, and different prophecies of the mystery schools have shown us that there may be upheavals in California at some point. So that's something that's across a bridge we'll have to cross when we hit it. I will say this in relation to Earth changes and things of this nature, that a kind of emergency preparation, I think, would be incredibly valuable skill to harness in 2021, not out of fear. And I don't want to, get bunkers to have a run on bunkers somehow, but just those practical things that we've learned in the last year really do come in handy. And whether it's earthquakes, whether it's blackouts, whether it's dirty tricks by the deep state, we want to be able to respond in a way as a community that's informed and has done some preparation along this track, and having nothing to do with like, hey, it's a pandemic world and all that stuff. No, more along the lines of, hey, the deep state is out of control and they're trying everything in their playbook in order to keep control. So therefore, in case they cause a blackout, or in case we hit upon things like earthquakes, we don't want them to have the ability to just roll in and take over further. So I think it would be a great idea, actually. Fantastic.
I have a lot of people to thank
for
Super Chats. Okay. Points on the Curve, a cult fan, Riz Fizz, Britannia Young, Joshua Jackson, Shazam, PJD, VJ, Charles Marlowe, Doreen Hewitt, John Doe, Chris Beatty, The Weed in Your Garden, Shanjak, Melissa Crimson, AM, Vernon Baumgartner, Havardian, Nicholas Sangaris, Carol Crumlish, Elizabeth Pont, Dude Abides, and Alan L. Thank you so much for your generosity tonight.
Fantastic. The support is really incredibly valuable for what we do, and we really, really appreciate it genuinely. And to all our people in the Ideas Room, thank you. And to our subscribers who keep the show going along with the Super Chat, we really appreciate that level of support, because I want to be able to go into such deeper levels with what we have, and this really makes it all possible. So it helps tremendously. We will be back next Friday, and we have some very special interviews coming up, along with, as I mentioned, those 2 interviews with Fitz are available to subscribers of our newsletter. That's the free newsletter, and you can get those episodes for free. Part 3 is something that our paid subscribers get, and that's coming out on Sunday for them, so you can look forward to that in your inbox, directly in your inbox, as we promised. So we really appreciate it. I'm going to do a couple of shout outs here since we have a moment or two. Tessa 1111, Alan L, thank you very much. Marco Zerpa, outstanding to have you. Jack, Gaia Sophia, outstanding crowd tonight. Great questions. Miss Olivia, just off the charts. Donna Corbett, Najat, excellent to see you here. Matt M, wow. Truth Flower, outstanding. Deborah Blair.
Somehow Deborah stayed up for the whole thing.
It's very impressive. It's great to see you. Silver Fox, Chi-Ji Young, of course. I know Carly's out there somewhere, and Kate is watching. It's great to see you. David Miller, Donna Corbett, Robin Mead, excellent group. Alchemy of Art, I like the name. Ronan Returns, I like that one. Justin, oh no, that's it. Fantastic. Brian Liberty, Andy B, fantastic crew tonight. We will see you all next Friday. And
Mr. Wolf wants to know, what treat tonight? I have begun intermittent fasting. There will be no treat. And I recommend David Sinclair for all of you out there who want to have your own usher in a new era for health and longevity.
I can appreciate that. I think a chocolate covered almond would be
Don't
something
tempt
that's
me.
good my speed right about now. Mark H, David Pierce, David Carl Young, excellent. Wayne Peak. Wow, it's great to see so many people out there tonight. And of course, the great question we had.
Before we do that, Maggie Smith wants to know, as well as many others, that they say they've subscribed to the newsletter and they don't get it. How do they? Sometimes we have to manually go in and.
Yeah, so it's for the free newsletter, just send it to info@darkjournalist.com. Just send your email address. And because sometimes if you sign up, there's a confirmation email that comes in, and if it doesn't come back, or if it gets in the spam folder, that'll happen. But yeah, if you send that to us, we can make sure you're on the newsletter list for sure. So great to see you all in the Ideas Room, and for the X series, the X State of the Union. We will see you all next week on Friday at 8 p.m. And, you know, it says end broadcast, but after all, it never really ends. Miss Olivia, fantastic.
Frank Monday wants me to eat a burrito. That is, don't tempt me.
I'll tell you, you just hit her weak point, because burritos are big with Olivia.
A burrito would be good right now. And I have a little tequila left. I'm going to be strong.
We'll see you all next week.
Okay. Thanks so everybody.
Much. Outstanding.
Okay.
Great
God bless.
Questions. Questions are off the charts.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone, and a great weekend. See you soon.